Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the July 9th meeting of the Portland City Council. Would you please call the roll?
Saltzman,
Here.
Novick, Fritz, Fish, Hales.
Here. Good afternoon, everyone. We have two items on the council calendar this afternoon. One is a continued hearing and one is a first hearing. If you're here to speak on those items, we welcome public testimony. Just make sure that our council clerk knows that you want to speak. We typically allow 3 minutes per person to testify. It doesn't look like we have so many people this afternoon that will be a difficult problem for us to manage. Of course, as always, we maintain the rules of decorum here in the council chambers, and if you agree with someone and feel compelled that you just have to indicate your support for their point of view, give them a thumbs up or a wave of the hand, or if you feel even strongly in the other direction, you can give them a thumbs down or some other polite hand gesture, but we ask that people not make vocal demonstrations in favor or against their fellow citizens' points of view here, so everyone can be heard. So with that, welcome. Oh, also, if you have handouts, make sure that Carla has those for us when you come up to speak. And if you're a lobbyist representing an organization under our code, you need to let us know that, please. So with those formalities out of the way, let's take up item number 754, please.
Update the floor area ratio bonus and transfer provisions of the Portland Zoning Code for the Central City to prioritize affordable housing development and other targeted public benefits.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Over 1 year ago, the City Council had its first hearing on revising the floor area bonus and transfer system to prioritize affordable housing. The council charged the Housing Bureau and the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to conduct an economic analysis and to develop recommendations for an incentive zoning bonus for affordable housing in the Central City. This proposal doesn't reprioritize how we use taxpayer funds. In fact, it doesn't use any taxpayer funds at all. It expands the pie of dollars available for affordable housing development by bringing to the table the development community to help be part of the solution to the affordable housing crisis. Floor area bonuses, also known as density bonuses, are provided to developers in exchange for the developers providing a community benefit. Over decades, the current floor area bonus program has grown to over 18 different bonus options. Most of these bonuses, in my opinion, are no longer necessary or effective and are poorly calculated to match the public benefit being sought. The reality is that many of these bonuses are things that the city can require, like eco-roofs and bike storage. What we cannot require, however, is affordable housing. State law prevents us from doing that. It's past time to streamline our bonus system to prioritize for the creation of affordable housing. In fact, there was a 2007 study that pointed out how many of our bonuses are really not in keeping or haven't been used or not keeping with current policy priorities of the city. This proposal before us today is crafted to grow the supply of affordable housing. It creates an on-site building option for developers to add affordable housing in future developments for Portlanders who may work in the Central City, but housing near their work is currently unaffordable to them. A household that makes between 60 and 80% of the median family income is not a wealthy household. It may be a household with 2 food service workers, a single parent working as a bus driver with 2 kids, or an entry-level teacher. Our State of the Housing Report, which we brought to Council a couple of months ago, has shown that the Central City and many other Portland neighborhoods are unaffordable to these families. It also clearly shows just how unaffordable our city in general is to many lower income families. So let me be clear, this proposal will also add substantial housing stock for households in the lower incomes from 0 to 60% of median family income by providing an option for developers to pay into an affordable housing fund, which is limited to investing in 0 to 60% of median family income housing. So this fund will aid the city in its goal to create more housing for more families who are experiencing homelessness and other households such as senior citizens who are relying entirely on Social Security for their income. And as always, the Housing Bureau continues its deep commitment to equity and how it invests these funds. So before I turn the presentation over to Joe Zender of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, Javier Mena of the Housing Bureau, and our economic consultant, David Schwartz, I'd like to make a small amendment to the resolution in terms of the timeline. People know I can be impatient, and we included a timeline for this to be presented or to come back to council in January of 2016. I have been persuaded that we should allow more time than that, and so I would like to offer an amendment that says that the request for changes to the zoning code return to the city council no later than July of 2016 instead of January 6th. So I would make that amendment.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to add that amendment to the draft resolution in front of us.
I
Further
have a
discussion?
question of that. Has the Planning Commission been invited to discuss this at all as yet?
I don't believe they have as of yet.
Commissioner, this timeline will allow the bonus to move forward as part of the Central City 2035 plan, so it'll be included in all of the Planning and Sustainability Commission hearings and vetting of that project. So if we move it to July 2016, that's when we're supposed to have the entire Central City plan back to you all.
So isn't it unusual for the council to take action on a zoning code issue without having the Planning Commission hearing first?
You know, not in terms of, there's precedent for getting direction from the city council to go undertake sort of a zoning process. The assumption is that this is sort of guidance to say, with these kind of parameters, we're interested in you all going and doing a full-blown legislative project that includes something like this, and it may or may not make it all the way through, but that's what we're supposed to do. And a precedent was West Hayden Island. We got city council direction to go take it to the next phase, and we started a process to do that, and eventually it went to the PSC. So it's in the spirit of that, it's a resolution to give us city council intent of interest of something we should try to include in the plan.
Okay, further
Mr.
discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
over here. Point of clarification, would that be the beginning of July or the end of July?
You said July, so I would assume that that means at some point in
Said,
July 2016, this comes back
Right,
to
so
us.
July 1st? or-
I said no later than July.
No later
We could
than-
put July 1st, 2016.
July 1st it is. Okay,
Thank you.
city attorney advises precision, and we will follow his advice. Roll call on that amendment.
Saltzman,
Aye.
Fritz,
I'm willing to vote aye for the purpose of putting it on the table. Aye.
Fish,
Aye.
Hales.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, and now I'd like to turn it over to our panel. And we also have Jill Sherman of Girding Edlin, who is going to walk us through a pro forma by popular demand. Commissioner Fish asked that she be here, and pleased to have her here.
She is,
But we're going
great.
to start out with Joe Zender.
Great. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Just a brief introduction to the proposal we're talking about today. As you've already heard, the Central City already has a system of floor area ratio bonuses. There's 18. They've been accumulating over the years since the 1980s. And of those 18, many are less expensive to do than others in terms of the return on FAR is easier to accomplish than others. Many have never been used. And of these bonuses, really the top three that are used are the residential bonus, the eco roof bonus, and the bike locker bonus. And on the residential bonus, one of its key features is that in certain parts of the Central City, if you build residential development, you can access a 3-to-1 bonus sort of automatically. And the logic to that was in the 1980s, the public benefit, that one public benefit we were really concerned about was whether or not we could even accomplish a residential Central City. So the bonus has been critical to that public benefit. And now the question is it still relevant, and is it time to take a look at it?
So let me interrupt you just for a second there to make sure I got that fact straight, and that is the current residential bonus has no income parameters attached to it.
Correct. It's just a residential unit, residential use. So those are the bonuses, and there's also a system in the Central City of transfers, where if you don't use all the FAR on a building, you can transfer it to another building, and that's open to certain properties, certain types of properties, and in certain locations, and this list summarizes those. It's another way of, once again, getting some form of public benefit or supporting some sort of public benefit through how FAR, how development entitlements are used. The ones that we've been talking about in our study are to take a look at the historic preservation and open space. So the study that we embarked on is considered both bonuses and open space. To do this study, we hired the consultant group of OTAC and EPS, David Schwartz here, who corrected me. And we started with interviews and roundtables, focus groups with the development community, because we wanted to build a pro forma that we could base the economics of a bonus on, and so you need to confirm a lot of assumptions about costs and rental rates and vacancies and the like. So this is a list of the developers who were involved in that throughout the project. And the proposal we came up with has sort of 5 key elements. First, on the bonus end, we're proposing a bonus for affordable housing that's either built on site, or we want to have an option where a payment into an affordable housing fund is an additional way to earn the bonus. Secondly, the strata of affordability that we focused and modeled on is 80% of median family income units and at 60-year affordability. So the level of affordability and the length of affordability affect the economics of the bonus, and so this bonus proposal is looked at 80 and 60 years. 3 is that how we structure the difference between the on-site bonus and the pay into the fund bonus, we want to promote on-site development. So we can do that sort of as we develop the specifics of the proposal by calibrating those two, the value of those 2 bonuses a little differently. 4 is that we want to have fewer bonus options, fewer than the 18 now that we have, so that we can make the affordable housing bonus a greater priority. And also, to the extent that we include other bonuses in the final package, we're going to try to calibrate them in terms of their value to the affordable housing bonus, so that the bonus, we're getting the similar valuation or similar amounts of public benefit if you choose one of the other options. But the idea is to try to make the affordable housing bonus the most attractive because of the documented need for affordable housing in general and in the Central City. The one exception, there's a couple of exceptions to this, just to mention that in South Waterfront in particular, in some sub-districts, we've got these bonuses that were really designed to be part of the development package, because in South Waterfront, we needed to deliver, for instance, waterfront improvements in the Greenway. So there's a bonus in South Waterfront for additional Greenway properties, and there's a transfer provisions in South Waterfront as well. So as we do this research, we're going to look at those in particular ones and see if there's logic or reasons that maybe they should be continued. And we're also going to say, if they're continued, how do we calibrate them to work in conjunction with an affordable housing bonus? And finally, there are limits in the Central City now. They run from 3-to-1 to 4-to-1 or more, depending on where you are. That of how much FAR you can add to a site with a bonus. So we're going to keep those limits so that everyone's assumptions about how much development can be on any given site will be the same as they are today. How you earn it's differently. So what can this produce? Just 2 sort of benchmarks on the production of this. If all based on how many how much development we expect to see in the Central City over the next 20 years. If all of it was on-site units, we could see somewhere between 800 and 1,300 units produced over that period of time. If all of it went into cash in lieu, we could expect somewhere between 120 and 200 million over that period of time. And it could be some mix of the 2, because that's how we expect it to work, some on-site and some into the fund.
So just in terms of your assumption, you know, we did just recently go through a recession where there were virtually no cranes in the air downtown. So what's your economic assumption over a 20-year period?
You know, we're drawing from the comprehensive plan assumptions for the Central City. So that is based on an econometric forecast from Metro. And so it's got the assumptions that 1 or 2 of those business cycles are in that period as well. So itself calibrated at the region-wide level and for the central city with some assumptions about that. It's aggressive, but it's based on how much, even with different turns of the economy over the next 20 years, we expect in terms of households moving to the region. With that, I'll turn it over to Javier.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Javier Mena. I'm the Assistant Director of the Portland Housing Bureau. First, I want to highlight Joe's last point, which is we expect both options of the modified plan to be utilized. We expect a number of units, affordable units at 80% or below, to be included in the development, but we also expect a number of projects paying into the Housing Investment Fund that will be utilized for development at 0 to 60% median family income citywide. And as you see in the map, in the central city, the market is not developing 80% units. Also, based on the State of Housing report, the market is for certain areas of the city is not producing 0 to 60. And so what this structure allows is to address both of those issues. Also echoing what Commissioner Salzman mentioned in terms of the income potential from households earning between 60 and 80, here are some examples in terms of maintenance worker, entry-level teacher, firefighter, in a household of 3 adult, 1 adult with bus driver, auto mechanic, entry-level police. So that's kind of in the 60 to 80% range in terms of type of work that we're looking at. And last time we met, which was a couple of weeks ago, there was a concern about there seemed to be a disconnect between what we were proposing in terms of the 60 to 80% median family income and the impact this would have on communities of color. And so what we have, based on that feedback, we've looked at those numbers. And within the city, the communities of color population that are between 60 and 80% is 17% compared to 16% of the white population within that income range. And we're looking, as Joe mentioned, between 800 to 1,300 units if that was to maximize the production. Within the communities of color, we're looking at about 7,000 potential new tenants into those units. And we see it as the job of the Bureau to make sure that we do the outreach and provide the resources and options for those communities to be able to access the new units. With that, I'd like to...
Before you move
Yes.
on to that, because as you know, I have some concerns about that, and I appreciate you following up after the work session. I just want to pass out to my colleagues on the council the actual numbers, because the percentages, I don't think, quite tell the whole story there. So from 60 to 80% median family income, according to your numbers, we have about 32,000 white people and about almost 11,000 people of color. So in terms, it may be the same as the proportion, but in terms of the absolute numbers of additional people who are going to be benefited by this proposed switch from 60% to 80%, it's 3 times as many white people as people of color.
Can I just get a clarification? Javier, this chart, does he have a copy?
He gave it to me.
Yeah, this is,
So Javier, would you define what a household is for purposes of this chart?
A 3-person household.
Pardon me?
A 3-person household. Is that
Up to 3
up
persons?
to a 3-person? It's a 3-person household. These numbers are based on...
And why is it based on a 3
No,
person?
this is household period. So it could be 1 person or it could be 4 people. It's based on, it's a household number, not a
So
population number.
the numbers here don't necessarily correlate to people or?
Correct.
Or are they households?
They are households.
So if there's more than one, or if there's 3 persons in some of these households, it would still only be reflected as a household for
Correct.
purpose of this data?
Correct.
Well, that complicates things a little bit.
And to answer your statement, Commissioner Fritz, I understand that there's a greater number of what households that will have access to this. And as I mentioned before, it is up to the Bureau to make sure that in all of our programs, that we establish programs that make this units available to households from communities of color. And that's something that we have to take into our own charge. So with that, I would like to turn over to Jill Sherman, as Commissioner Fish suggested at our work session. Jill has been graciously agreed to provide Pro Forma 101 and its relation to the recommended density bonus update.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My slides will be filled with numbers and no pictures, but that is what pro formas are about. So I'm hoping to go through this quickly and then have some time for questions. And again, the purpose is simply to walk you through kind of the key elements in pro forma and financial analysis as relates to real estate development. So there's 3 columns, and I looked essentially at 3 cases. The base case is an existing quarter block project under development. It had an FAR of 4-to-1, and we were able to get to 6-to-1 using the existing residential bonus. So that's what the column all the way to the left represents. And then we looked at 2 cases adding an affordable housing requirement to getting the additional density. One assumed that 25% of any additional FAR would be required to be affordable to households at or below 80%. The other looked at the same thing, but at a 15% requirement. So in the project, it's wood frame construction over a concrete podium. The total gross square feet just under 52,000. So under the base case, there was no additional FAR required because we were able to use the existing residential bonus, so no affordability requirement. Under the 15% requirement, you need 11,900 additional FAR. So base, again, 4-to-1 means you have 40,000 based on a 10,000 square foot site. So 15% of that 11,900 is that 1,785. At 25%, it's 2,975. In all cases, the total rentable square footage is the same, the average unit size is the same, and the total number of units is the same. In the base case, you've got a mix of studios, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, and all of them are at market. Under the 15% requirement, you would get about 3 affordable units at 80%, and I've just broken them out, 1 studio, 1 1-bedroom, and 1 2-bedroom. And under the 25% requirement, you get a couple additional affordable units. I've got 1 studio, 3 1-bedrooms, and 1 2-bedroom, sort of trying to mirror the distribution of units, of market rate units. In all cases, there's about 0.55 parking stalls per unit. It's 31 stalls. These are mechanized parking stalls. On the revenue side, the market rate units are an average of $276 per rentable square footage, and with 3 affordable units, that decreases to $2.69 on average. Essentially, the average is getting pushed down by the units that are restricted at 80%, and at 25%, you're looking at $266 on average per rentable square foot, and the parking cost of $125 per month stays the same in all the scenarios. We already looked at information about what that means to be at 80% of area median income. So just, you can see a 1-person household, a 1.5-person household. Now, I know that seems a bit odd, but the convention for affordability with HUD is that you assume 1.5 people per bedroom. So for essentially a studio, you use the income for a 1-person household. For a 1-bedroom, you use 1.5-person household, which is essentially just an average of a 1-person household and a 2-person household. And for a 2-bedroom unit, you use the 3-person household. Affordability is calculated by taking that annual income, multiplying it by 30% and dividing it by 12. And subtracting a utility allowance that takes into account cost for utilities that tenant will be paying. That results in a rent limit for studio at $983, $1,041 for a 1-bedroom, and $1,247 for a 2-bedroom. And if you compare those to what current market rate rents are for new construction in kind of A locations, central city type locations, you might be looking at about $1,400 a month for a studio, $1,600 to $1,700 a month for a one-bedroom and about $2,600 a month for a two-bedroom. So you can see that the differential is not insignificant. The expense assumptions for all the pro formas are the same. There's operating expenses per unit per year of $4,500, so that has to do with your property management and that staff and personnel and maintenance, common area utilities, landscaping, et cetera, and property taxes per unit per year of about $2,500, vacancy at 5%. Your project cost is in the same in all three scenarios. Due diligence costs are things like environmental studies, geotechnical studies, and surveys. Land cost at $170 a square foot. For a 10,000 square foot site, that's 1.7 million. General hard costs that your general contractor would have, just under 10 million. Other construction hard costs includes things like signage and security that your general contractor typically would not carry in their number. Architecture and engineering fees, building permits and systems development charges. Other soft costs include things like insurance, legal fees. There's quite a bit of that that's in here for marketing. So marketing, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, et cetera. Contingencies are 5% of the project hard and soft costs. Developer fee, about 5% of the project costs. And then financing costs, which include loan fees, but primarily capitalized interest. So interest during both the construction period and the lease-up period on your construction loan, for a total project cost of just under $16.2 million. All three scenarios use exactly the same assumptions for financing. I'm assuming about 62% loan, and the rest would be equity. And then, without going through those numbers, suffice it to say, you come down to, from a financial analysis perspective, I'm looking at a rental constant, which is a fairly simple kind of point-in-time measure of the financial feasibility. It's the net operating income, so that's income less expenses, divided by the total project cost. And for this project, in this location, I'm suggesting that the minimum rental constant, and I really mean minimum, for a feasible project is about 5.6%, and the calculated rental constant is about 5.6% under the base with the current residential bonus scenario. As you can imagine, when you lower the revenue side without changing either the expense side or the project cost side, the result is a decrease to the rental constant. So basically, you've decreased net operating income and you've kept the project cost the same. So under the 25% scenario, you get down to 5.3%, and under the 15% scenario, it's kind of in the middle at 5.4%.
So at 5.6, you say that's right at the borderline
Right.
of what people consider financially viable. So obviously, or I think it's obvious that your pro forma is making a case that people would not use this bonus.
You would be challenged if nothing changes in the cost structure. In other words, land values don't change and other things don't change. You know, you would be challenged to, I think, find an equity investor. But that assumes, again, today's land value for that site, which assumes really, when you look at that site, you assume that you can get to 6-to-1 FAR because of the way the existing bonuses are set up. So you don't look at that site and say, oh, that site's a 4-to-1, that's how it should be valued. You really look at it based on what you know you'll take advantage of from the
The
current.
sellers have, in effect, incorporated those bonuses into what they assume the property's
I
worth.
think that's true,
The existing bonus.
correct.
And this was a very specific case example, right?
Yeah,
The
it's
site
one
specific.
project, and I think it's more about walking through how the numbers and how income, expenses, and project cost, you know, interrelate, rather than to specifically address the policy.
So Jill, you know, I had the benefit of you doing a sort of 101 for Chair Kogan and me when we were doing the big look, looking at our tax abatement programs, and your your analysis allowed us to sort of basically understand the system better, and then we tried to respond with policy recommendations. I have a couple questions off this, which I'm seeing for the first time, obviously, today. What, if we were to tweak something, what would we tweak to get net operating income closer to what you think is the sweet spot?
Well,
In terms of the proposal before the council?
right. You could do something with property taxes.
Or fees.
Or
So
fee,
some-
or
some-
fees. I mean, you know, there's other parts of the pro forma, again, so to keep the return the same, there's a number, one is that, you know, maybe land values change over time. I don't know, you know, how that would play out. The other is on the expense side, and the one that the city has and other taxing jurisdictions have some control over is property taxes. And then there are also obviously fees in the pro forma. If those went down a little bit, you could also make up the differential of the lost income, if that were what you were trying to accomplish.
So let me, if I could, pose two other questions that are in the nature of hypotheticals. Let's assume under this proposal, there's no disincentive to do the payment in lieu of. Okay? The way it's currently constructed, there's a bit of a disincentive to opt out rather than build on-site. Let's assume for a moment that there was no disincentive. Based on your experience, the typical developer who wants to use this program, more likely to build on-site or do a payment in lieu?
If the impact to the financial returns are the same,
Yes.
I think it would depend on the, you know, maybe the particular developer and their preferences. I think I could make an argument for wanting to do them on site at 80% as a, you know, it's nice, those are important units, and also it's, you've got 20% of the units at a rent that you know are going to lease up just like that, so there's a risk mitigation there.
Okay. And let me add another overlay. So I'm probably more inclined to want to focus on 0 to 60 MFI than 0 to 80. But the way this proposal is constructed, if there is a payment in lieu, in other words, if you don't build on site, the money goes into a 0 to 60 account, if you will, which I'm hoping has 30% set aside like qualities. So by creating a disincentive for doing a payment in lieu, are we working against my interest in having more money go into the 0 to 60 pot?
I think, again, if it's financially, the impact on returns is the same, I really think then you're going to, developer by developer, they're going to have a preference for either the fee in lieu or the on-site. So while I might think the on-site is a good idea, there may be others that just say, oh, I don't want to deal with, you know, a requirement that's ongoing for 60 years. I would just rather pay my fee and be done with it. So I think you'll still get fee in lieu.
And we'll also get fee in lieu for commercial projects. If a project has no residential intention.
I mean, as you know, we get pushback from developers around the idea of a 10-year covenant through tax abatements. And one of the great, I think, features of this proposal is that Dan has proposed a 60-year covenant of affordability, which I applaud. But just based on my experience, I would have thought you'd say more likely the developer will not want to be burdened with would prefer not to have a 60-year covenant and the compliance requirements, and therefore more likely to put it into a fee in lieu.
Again, I think it'd be developer by developer. I think some will absolutely agree with that statement, and there may be others that want to include them on site for other objectives they have as well.
Just to clarify, though, this FAR buy-in is available on commercial properties even when housing is not allowed?
Yes.
So it's like a system development charge on commercial for housing.
Well, again, it's a bonus, so it's a discretionary thing that a developer may choose to take advantage of.
Interesting.
Not a system development charge, which you have to pay.
But if you want your extra bonus, that's the only way to get it.
That's my preferred outcome. Still, this proposal has a ways to go before it becomes final.
So Javier or Joe, in light of the analysis that Jill has furnished to us, do we have to scrub this a little more to get to, closer to 5.6 or above? Or, I mean, do we have a concern now that this is actually going to create the incentives that we hope it does?
Well, we definitely need to look at it again closely. However, I think the big variable, and I think Jill mentioned it as well, and I'd like to turn it over to David to talk about this a little bit, is that the land values today assume sort of a automatic 3-to-1. And so this system would, in our pro formas, had a different land value, and if you assume a land value that's more reflective of having to pay for that 3-to-1, the pro forma comes closer into balance, and actually that's what ours is based on that worked. That change in land value is an impact on property owners for sure. Every time, we change an entitlement anywhere in the city, that, theoretically happens. And one of the ways you can see it is that every time we change an entitlement, no matter what it is, there'll be a little rush of permits before it goes into effect. So in the central city, this is the biggest sort of change in entitlements, if you think about it in terms of square feet, that we've done in a while. But that change in property value is likely to be an outcome. But one way to look at it is the property values today are supplemented or inflated by the fact that you can just assume you get a free 3-to-1. And the principle of a bonus is that there is additional development entitlements in return for a public benefit. And a little bit what's happened to our system is that the value of the bonus and the value of the public benefit are out of calibration because they're older, our objectives have changed, they've sort of been added to piecemeal over time. So you want to get them closer to each other so that you're getting the most out of your bonus. You're using this bonus for the public benefit most efficiently. So no matter what we do, this change in property value impact would theoretically occur. So, David, you have anything to add? And then hit the button.
I really don't have anything else to add to that. It would probably involve just a bunch of sort of wheel spinnings, figuratively, to go through the exercise of evaluating which sort of assumptions in the modeling exercise that we went through you would possibly change. As Jill mentioned, land values are probably the single most critical factor or key factor in this analysis, under the assumption that the density bonus that exists today is basically capitalized and added into landowners, property owners, developers' expectations of highest and best use of properties. And if that assumption changes, it's not likely to occur overnight, but it is likely to occur for the most part over time. And that's not something that would affect the way we would recalibrate this model, for example.
You may have done this at the work session, and I may not have all the documents in front of me, or maybe not, and that is, you mentioned here in passing at the beginning of your presentation that the current bonuses have been lightly used overall. Do we have a box score of how those have been used? And then the other box score that I'm interested in is, given what Jill just said about property owners have assumed the presence of the bonus and the value of land and selling land to people for developing multifamily projects, what's the percentage of multifamily projects that are utilizing the bonus?
That's a good question. I have the box score.
Okay.
Since 2005, there's been over 50 bonuses, used. And of those 50, almost 50% have been the residential bonus. So I don't have it by square foot, Mayor, but
Yeah.
in terms of how many bonuses have been used. Then, so there's 23 of the residential bonus. There's 13 of the eco-roof bonus. And there's 4 of the bike locker bonus.
Okay,
And then the rest are, below that line. And just for context, over that same period of time, transfers have been used 18 times.
And there's at least, I think, 6 or 8 of the bonuses that have not been used at all, right?
Correct, right, never been used.
So I guess that's, let that sort of sink in and be a lesson to us. We have long debates in this room about theoretical ideas, and some of them come to pass and some of them don't, but
Right.
that we should certainly take that into account.
And-
But again, given what Jill said, I would assume that at least in the current real estate environment, that most residential projects in the central city are using the bonus, right? You think so? Even though there have only been 23 so far, given the run-up in land prices, maybe has that accelerated, I guess, is one way for me to ask that question.
The other notes I have here is that the residential bonus has been used 33% of the time.
Only 33% of the
Right,
time.
but so
Okay.
there's, part of using the bonus too is whether or not you need it. And just all those factors that Jill is talking about, your risk acceptance, your level of investment. Where we do I'm not sure how useful this is, but where we're finding the bonus most frequently used is in this 4-to-1 to 6-to-1 range. And what's interesting about the 6-to-1 is that that is one of the places where if you used all 3 especially, you bump into a new construction type. So, when we started this model, we thought, well, that's not going to likely to happen. You'd go up to the limits of that and it would, but partially what's going on, we believe, is that it's worth it for developers to bump it up that much because really rents can also go higher. There's a premium or it's just where the market is. So the same way, we're affecting, the price of land affects the cost of development. If there's a rent premium, too, it works on the other side of the equation. So we think that's why the 6-to-1 has been such an attractive, and even the 4-to-1 and 5-to-1 have been attractive sort of levels to use bonuses in.
Thank you.
Joe, is it fair to say, as we debate the question of what bonuses should remain, that in addition to determining what our priorities are, because as you know, the current laundry list reflect old priorities, so what are our current priorities? They must be calibrated to the market, and then they must pencil out. Because if they don't pencil out, we're just going to create a strong incentive for people to jump to some other incentive, other bonus, that doesn't provide the same level of public benefit, and we're undercutting what we're trying to do here with the affordable housing bonus. Is that a fair comment? You're all nodding, so.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we did have one invited panel, if there's.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually have a couple more questions.
Oh, okay, not yet.
So following up, looking at the resolution, it says support historic preservation through the FAA transfer and development of publicly owned private space through transfer provisions. So essentially, this resolution is saying that affordable housing will be the only bonus that's available?
Yeah, does it say that explicitly? It says, based on our study, our recommendation for affordable housing is a bonus, and our recommendation for historic preservation and open space is a transfer. And I believe our study didn't reach a conclusion about which or how many of those other bonuses you get rid of. But what it did conclude is 2 things. One is we want to make affordable housing the priority, just given the state that we're in terms of housing prices and availability. And the second is we want to calibrate whatever else the city council thinks is valuable enough to put in a central city bonus so that it's in the same ballpark and comparable competitive with the affordable housing bonus.
So the way that it's written, it doesn't actually say that, in my opinion. So if maybe during testimony, you could take another look at it to make it clear that this is one of many, because it looks like this is doing away with potential FAR increases for privately owned public and private open space. So that's one question I have. And then the second question is for the city attorney, and that's following up on my previous question about the process. The resolution says that we're directing the Planning and Sustainability to craft changes to the zoning code reflecting these principles and to implement any changes no later than July 1st. So my question is in terms of state law regarding the Planning Commission supposedly needing to propose to us changes to the zoning code. When we did the West Hayden Island resolution, we said Planning Commission tell us a proposal for how to do this, but we didn't say we are going to do this. So could you give me some guidance as to what happens next if we approve this resolution the way it's worded?
I understood from Mr. Zender's prior comments that it would be staff's intention to take it forward to the Planning Commission and ask for the Planning Commission's recommendations that would then be forwarded to the council with the proposed changes.
So Commissioner, maybe, again, you could have this, and Mayor, you could have the staff look at changing the final be it resolved, because saying we're going to implement any changes, I mean, do you have enough time to come to us?
If we stay on schedule, Commissioner, yes, that's our intent. Actually, then, yeah, did we do the last slide? Oh, this may be responsive, Commissioner. This is the schedule for the Central City 2035 plan. So we're supposed to be back at City Council in the time frame, more or less, of what Commissioner Saltzman has requested. The only way to, and the language could be clearer possibly in the resolution, but the only way to implement something, a zoning code provision, is through a legislative process. And our legislative processes have to go through the Planning and Sustainability Commission as the hearing of first evidence, and then come to, who make a recommendation to City Council. So that's the only way to implement a zoning code change other than a code waiver.
So it seems actually unlikely with this schedule that since the hearings aren't to council until July, this resolution says that we have to start doing it July 1st when it won't have been reviewed by council. So it's something for you to look at as we hear testimony. I don't want to
let's get you to come back to us about that.
And looking at a planning commissioner and knowing how challenging the whole process is going to be, that just seems unlikely to me that we're going to be able to do that, given that we haven't had any planning commission discussion on this up to this point.
Okay, other questions for the team? Thank you all very much. And then let's call your panel, Commissioner.
Okay, I'd like to invite up Jonathan Ostar of Opal, who's fresh off the dawning work of trying to repeal the prohibition on inclusionary zoning in the legislature. John Miller, Executive Director of Oregon Opportunity Network, and Sarah Stevenson, Executive Director of Innovative Housing, Inc. Thank you all for being here, and Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, thanks for the opportunity to testify in support of this resolution today. I think we have to be aggressive in terms of how we approach the issue of affordability. And I think this policy, to Commissioner Saltzman's credit, this policy reflects that aggressive posture. As you all know, mandatory inclusionary zoning is prohibited in the state, one of 2 states in the country that don't allow it. It is one of the better tools at bringing a return on affordability in new developments. We fell just short at the finish line. I'm confident that we'll be able to pick it back up in 6 short months. And move it forward. But until then, and the dialogue that I think we've generated and started, I think it requires us to really move forward aggressively, focused on the issue of affordability without distractions of other types of amenities that frankly both the market is driving already, that we can require outright if we so choose, and also that are just not as critical to working families as the issue of both affordability and mobility on the housing market is. And I think it's time, what might have made sense 20, 30 years ago when we were looking to stimulate residential development is just not the same need today. We don't have that need today. Residential development is happening, the market's driving it, and so it's time that we adjust our priorities accordingly. So this is really the opportunity to do that and to start that, to take that first step in the central city, and hopefully we expand that to the neighborhoods soon thereafter. We support an on-site production goal, a target goal of 80% MHI. Commissioner Fish, we certainly would, welcome the ability to reach lower income families, but this is an incentive policy. And so I think, as you heard, it has to pencil out for developers, particularly in the context of a current profit entitlement context. And I think what you heard today is I wish we were able to deliver that message in Salem this session, because it's not developers' profits that are really the issue, it's the underlying land values. And we've already given a windfall, frankly, to property owners by not enforcing a stricter incentive-based code over the last 30 years. It's been factored into land prices. When we add a light rail line in, land prices around that rail line go up, and property owners are the ones that get the windfall. And I think over time, those land values need to come back and be adjusted, and this is one way that we start to chip away at that and do that, and hopefully build more support for more aggressive approaches down the road, and hopefully we can restore local control over the full gamut of housing tools in the near future. So we support the policy. I wish we could be a little bit more aggressive with the time frame, frankly. I think you heard that we see this in a lot of different contexts, that there's a rush of permits before something is going to hit, and I'm concerned about bumping it out 6 months, and potentially, as Commissioner Fritz pointed out, the schedule is maybe not as favorable as we thought, so I don't want to create more work for Mr. Zender, but I certainly want to see us move forward as aggressively as possible. I think we know what we need to do, and it's time to do it. Thank you.
Jonathan, can I ask you two questions?
Please.
If the incentives were the same, would you rather see housing at 0 to 80 on-site, or payment in lieu to a fund at 0 to 60? If the incentive system was neutral?
Mayor Hales, Commissioner
You don't,
Fitch.
actually, we're not the state legislature. You don't need to give us your address, and
I'm
you don't
coming
need
off
to-
of a pretty brutal
You don't
campaign.
need to
so-
mention the mayor's name.
I don't mean to punt, but I don't want to choose, because I do think that it's a little bit of a false choice. I think that developers, we will see developers utilize a mix, and I think you heard that some developers will have a preference for one versus the other, and so I hope that we don't have to set up a posture where we have to choose one or the other, because I do want the city to have the financial flexibility to target residential development at a lower MHI. On-site production at below 80% in the central city just doesn't seem very realistic. Otherwise, that the developers just won't bite. It won't make sense for them. And so as much as I would love to see us recalibrate the profit entitlement context, I don't know that this is that time.
But what if we structured it so that it would cost a certain amount? You look at the pro forma for the building at 60%, and then you made the in lieu fee much higher, which also went to 60%, to 0 to 60. You get fewer units at 60%, but I'm not
Sure.
clear as to why why you and your organization are supporting subsidies for 80%.
That's the trade-off, is the production, right? And so you will get fewer units at 60%, and when we're talking about on-site in Central City, I support a balanced approach that Commissioner Saltzman's put forward that would hopefully also stimulate some real money, tangible money, new money that doesn't cost the public anything, that we can then use to hit the 60% and below target in off-site production. So I think it's a reasonable, balanced approach. I would not oppose a 60% on-site target if the planning department thinks that it can produce units. I'm worried that it won't produce units.
But we could structure it so that it wouldn't produce units, but it would increase, you could get more fee in lieu.
Fee in lieu,
Not if they didn't avail themselves of the bonus.
if they didn't take advantage of it, and I am worried about the fee in lieu in the sense that it is more attenuated. It's contingent upon being able to acquire property and construct a property. I'm worried that the fee in lieu won't won't return a full unit, a one-to-one replacement for that new unit. I know that we can price it high enough to both incentivize on-site production and also make sure that developers that take advantage of the fee in lieu are actually providing some real money.
You know, I'm actually glad you made that point, because I remember during the struggle over preservation, the big debate over preservation, there were some who said it would be cheaper just to demolish a building rather than preserve it and build somewhere else. And we always seem to leave out of that equation, build where?
Right.
And with what? So, you know, we had these rarefied discussions about the cost per unit of preserving, as if there was this lot across the street that we acquired that was a perfect comparator. There was one other thing in your testimony, your written testimony, that I was just curious, and I try to read my emails very carefully, and I think I understand this issue, but you caution us to resist the political expediency of placating enablers of the status quo. And other than being just a great line, they have apparently bypassed my office in raising their concerns. Who are you talking about? Because I don't actually have anybody who's objected to this. They've raised questions about how to fine tune it, but who out there is the enablers of status quo that doesn't like this proposal?
Well, if you haven't had any objections, then you can just use the line for a different purpose and do that.
Save it for later, yeah.
This was, so you took a page out of George Bush. This is preemptive.
Sure.
This is preemptive in case.
You know, and just in the context of, I think, what has been a fairly brutal, not just recent legislative cycle around this kind of very issue from a mandatory perspective, I just think that people resist change. And it can come from both sides. There's resistance coming from even more progressive sides that don't want to give up potential environmental amenities or benefits. And I just think that it's time for us to get real with the affordability crisis that we're facing.
So in the discussions you've been having, have the environmentalists and the bike advocates and the other users of the other bonuses been at the table?
I haven't heard it, but I want to say that I think that's largely in part to a very strong, fierce anti-displacement PDX coalition that we're just one small part of, that I do think is framing the issue appropriately, and I think bringing potential fence sitters or people who might have some stickiness around this along and getting them on board. So I actually think it's just been the result of very strong organizing work.
So when we're done with testimony, I'd like to hear what the outreach has been and who's been involved in the discussions.
Just for the record, the assignment to the Planning Bureau on this issue was not to come back with a proposal to eliminate the other bonuses. It was to come up with a proposal that would create incentives for the affordable housing. As part of that proposal, they have suggested we scale back the others so that this is prioritized. But that actually wasn't the assignment. It wasn't even part of the debate. And until the presentation came to council, this council hadn't even started the discussion about the relative merits of other bonuses. So there might have been a lot of good organizing going on, but it actually hadn't even been framed for discussion until we got the proposal. So I just want to acknowledge that. And it may be a good idea to take the 18 and shrink it to 2 or 3, and that's going to be a decision we'll make when we get back the planning and sustainability recommendation, but that actually hasn't been before us. And so I don't know where all the other advocates for those positions would weigh in, and frankly, I don't think we've solicited their view on that subject yet. So
You should be getting testimony today, if not invited, but welcome testimony that shows a broad range of stakeholders who I think are all on the same page on this.
Welcome, John.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm John Miller. I'm Executive Director of Oregon Opportunity Network. I also sit on the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee of the city, and I'm a member of the Welcome Home Coalition. I want to thank you for your opportunity to have me come and speak in support of this ordinance today. As you know, Oregon On and our partners are advocating for multiple tools and policies to help meet the affordable housing needs in our city and across the state. In light of the city's recent State of Housing report and HUD's new fair housing requirements that came out yesterday, There's no doubt that this is a significant issue here in the city, and that the federal government is going to be watching carefully going forward on what efforts we're making in order to firmly further fair housing and make sure that there's an adequate supply of affordable housing in all of Portland's high opportunity areas. Certainly the Central City is one of those key high opportunity areas, and this is a great first step in the city asserting itself to meet that requirement. We know that there's no single tool or solution that will address the entire shortfall of homes and the ranges of needs in our community. We need to pursue multiple tools and strategies at all levels of government and across all sectors. To take just one example, Oregon On, along with 95 other organizations, are working within the Welcome Home Coalition to create a long-term, very large, sustainable revenue source to help fund affordable housing. We see this ordinance as a great complement to that effort. Affordable, equitable housing must be a top priority for the city and our region. We can't hope to address any of our shared goals around education, healthcare, jobs, economic development, and prosperity unless folks have a roof over their head. With thousands of low-income families facing unaffordable rents and lack of affordability, in particular, as shown in the housing report, knowing that virtually no Portland neighborhoods are affordable for low-income families of color, we need bold action. This proposal, while it's not a complete solution, is a critical step forward. Redesigning and updating the Central City bonus system to prioritize affordable housing is absolutely the right thing to do, and we applaud Commissioner Saltzman for bringing this proposal forward. In today's market, beneficial amenities like bike racks and eco-roofs have become common practice. And even, I would say, as far as bike racks go, a market imperative. Pretty much everyone's putting those in anyway. Speaking for myself, I'm an avid biker, and I'm also on the board of the Community Cycling Center. I get the importance of access to bike amenities, but I believe there are other tools out there, plus the market is already meeting that need. The proposed program is voluntary and it's flexible. We support its allowance for either inclusion of affordable units on site or in lieu of contributions to develop housing elsewhere. Although with that said, considering HUD's new rule to provide units within high opportunity areas, I would err on the side of getting the units actually in the buildings within the Central City. The city can't solve this problem on its own. We definitely need to engage the private market in this effort. So far, we see all the development that's happening on Division and on Williams. The private market is not involved in this effort. This is an opportunity to allow them to participate without taking a hit, if you will. It can pencil out. I know we had an example that maybe put that into question, but I think that's one example, and there's lots of different ways that we can tweak this, and also pairing it with other programs that the city has. Certainly, this would be a great way to engage the private sector. As a former developer of single-family homes, I know how challenging it can be to pencil out projects, and that we have to carefully balance our policies to avoid unintended consequences. But in today's market, with thousands of new market rate units slated for development in the next few years, frankly, there's a lot of money for folks to make right now in this market, and it's not such a reach to have them include some of these using this bonus, some affordable units. We urge your rapid adoption of this proposal. Thank you, as always, for your leadership and for supporting this progressive solution to solve this critical need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Sarah, welcome.
All right, well, I'm Sarah Stevenson, Executive Director of Innovative Housing. We own and operate 925 affordable rental units in the region, with another 62 coming online in Old Town this month. I support this proposal because it helps us capture the value of density and use that value to address our growing need for affordable housing. I think we all recognize that need, and I think we know that the greatest need citywide is for housing affordable to households at 0 to 60% AMI. But we also need to recognize that we've got a significant gap in the Central City for housing that's affordable for our working class. We recognized this need at IHI several years ago, and we've been working to increase these units since 2012, when we developed 34 workforce housing units with our own money. That's slow and difficult work, however, because currently there are little or no resources available to subsidize or incentivize housing at this income level, and 80% rents will not support the cost of development. So if you leave it to the market, it is not going to happen without some sort of incentive structure. That's why I'm so pleased to see that this proposal includes an option for developers to build the units on-site. As you've heard many times, we think that's a really important option. And based on our experience income mixing at different projects, we think that households at 80% will mix seamlessly into market rate developments, making it a more attractive option for developers. Unfortunately, people at 80% can't afford rental housing currently available in the central city. So this proposal provides developers with an attractive option to increase their FAR to get where they need to go, while simultaneously meeting the city's need for affordable workforce housing. It's a win-win, in my opinion. And while I believe that including 80% units in market rate projects is feasible and it can be done, it will likely be attractive to many developers. It's great that there's also a proposed payment in lieu option. It gives developers an option to pay into a fund that allows us to increase resources for 0 to 60% housing citywide. You know, we desperately need more affordable housing, and targeting the value created by FAR bonuses is a perfect way to generate these resources. There's a clear nexus between the value generated by denser development in desirable parts of our city and our affordability gap, making this proposal a very reasonable way to increase the focus and efficacy of the bonus program. I urge you to support the proposal, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. That completes the invited testimony.
Okay, thank you all. Then let's turn to the sign-up sheet, please, Carla.
We have 7 people signed up, and the first 3, please come on up, are Michael Buonocore, Maggie Talmadge, and Heidi Goonan.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. Mayor Hales, Commissioners, you all received a letter from me recently in support of this proposal. I'm sure even absent that letter, you would expect that Home Forward likes and supports this, and we appreciate Commissioner Saltzman's leadership in bringing it forward. I'll be brief. I think, as you know, Home Forward provides a portfolio of affordable housing, and we also provide rent assistance to thousands of families in our community to help them pay their rent. And the ability of the rent assistance that we have available today is not enough to help people afford to live in a lot of areas of the central city. And so it really is the creation of hard units, of physical apartments in neighborhoods that are otherwise out of reach for folks economically that is going to be a critical part of a long-term solution for this community. And this is a step in that direction. It's not everything, but it's a good thing that will help, and we're pleased to support it.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Hales and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the Coalition. The Coalition of Communities of Color.
Oh, Margaret, put your name in the record, sorry.
Margaret Talmadge. Thank you. The Coalition of Communities of Color urges Council to support Commissioner Saltzman's resolution, prioritizing affordable housing development in the city's FAR bonus and transfer provisions. The mission of the Coalition is to address the socioeconomic disparities, institutional racism, and inequity of services experienced by our families, children, and communities, and to organize for collective action resulting in social change to attain self-determination, wellness, justice, and prosperity. We're an alliance of 20 culturally specific community-based organizations with representation from 6 communities of color: African, African American, Asian and Pacific Islander, Latino, and Native American and Slavic. Our families and communities face disproportionate housing cost burdens, often spending more than 30 or even 50% of their income on housing. The recent State of Housing report in Portland reiterates this. While communities of color represent 30% of Multnomah County and 50% of children 0 to 5. Only average white households and married couples with children have median incomes high enough to withstand rising housing costs in most parts of the city. As housing prices rise and rents rise, Portland residents, and in particular, communities of color and low-income communities are seeing their incomes and housing options severely constrained. Households are steadily pushed to the fringes of cities, communities are increasingly segregated, and widespread disparities are exacerbated. We believe today's private market already provides many public benefits, such as water features or bike racks. Instead, benefits incentivized through this FAR bonus and transfer provision must prioritize one of our city's most pressing issues, affordable housing. Without stable, affordable housing, our families may not see these benefits of public parks, open spaces, or bike racks. The FAR bonus and transfer provisions are just one tool of many required to meet the housing needs of our communities. No one tool will be the solution to the city's affordable housing crisis. However, incentive zoning practices that support affordable housing development or an in lieu fund by the private market allow developers to be part of the solution. Our city needs to capture the value of density and elevate affordable housing as a primary community benefit in this mechanism. I thank you for your time and your continued leadership in support of more equitable housing in this city. Thank you.
Could you explain some more? Because at 80%, that's not, as you said, the State of Housing report showed that the median income of communities of color is far less than that. So it's not going to, other than the fee in lieu, which certainly will support the 0 to 60, setting the bar at 80% for production of central city housing isn't going to necessarily help communities of color.
We also see, as many have reiterated, that we have a need for housing regardless, and we need more units. And to prioritize and capture some of those within the 60 to 80% leaves a lot more room for public investment into the 0 to 60. We see that by incentivizing the private market to develop and include affordable housing, we can use additional funds for 0 to 60.
Even if it's white people who are living in that workforce housing, so-called workforce housing.
We will have, as you saw, 17% of households as well are communities of color in the study, represent the 60 to 80%.
Thank you.
Let's be clear, though, under the Fair Housing Act, the only thing we can do is market and target. We cannot screen. I mean, one of the great ironies of the Westchester Fair Housing litigation is the racial composition of the people living in the houses that are the affordable units that were the byproduct of a lawsuit saying you're putting up racial roadblocks. And I'll give you a hint. It is not heavily tilted towards the people of color necessarily. So fair housing is a tricky thing here, and you can target, you can partner, you can steer, you can, but same thing applies, frankly, in something I support, which is retirement homes for the LGBTQ community. It's a wonderful idea. It's a model that works. The only problem is you can't screen out straight couples, but you can market and develop something like akin to what I think Hacienda has done very effectively with Villa de Sueños and sort of targeting a population, but you can't say to Somalis, you can't live here. So it is a delicate balance.
And if you could further help me understand, yes, the 16% to 17% at that range doesn't make the inequity any worse, but if we look at the 0 to 60, there's a far higher proportion of people of color versus white folks. So why, I will support it if you're telling me I should, at least that element time I try to fix some of the other pieces, but if you're not troubled by the racial inequities, then I will take your advice, but I'm still not understanding why.
Of course, we're troubled by the racial inequities in the city. However, if we're looking at what will incentivize developers to build, if we're looking at what pencils out builds more units and that we can funnel funds into the 0 to 60%, as opposed to using a benefit, to target bike racks or using a benefit to target.
Oh, no question. My only question is between the 60%, setting the bar at 60% for actually developing affordable units versus setting them at 80.
If it was feasible, yes, it would be great to have 0 to 60%, but it looks like you may be going back for further analysis on that.
Well, the study that we looked at in the work session showed that, yes, I mean, we can set it up any way we want. You just give more FAR bonus for fewer number of 60%. So you'd get fewer overall units, but it's absolutely possible to set it up so that the incentive would be for 0 to 60 rather than 0 to 80, or actually it'll be top of the range, so it's 60% versus 80%.
So again, I'm going to have to go back that it's still fewer households that we're going to be able to house. It's fewer affordable housing units that will be built.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your advice.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor Hales and Commissioners. My name is Heidi Ginnon. I work with Upstream Public Health as our Transportation and Land Use Policy Manager. At Upstream, we work to create the physical, social, and economic environments where Oregonians can thrive. And infrastructure and amenities like bike racks and green roofs and public art are all really important health-supporting pieces of the environment, and we encourage the city to continue to use the tools that you have at your disposal, like the zoning code and technical assistance provision, to mandate or encourage those. But at Upstream, we're not just concerned about promoting health outcomes, we're actually concerned about reducing health disparities. And we have to recognize that some of our friends and neighbors have been experiencing these large and persistent health disparities for a very long time. And although policy cannot erase these disparities by itself, policy helps create some of them, and we can certainly use policy to help reduce some of them. It's crystal clear that the cost and availability of housing in our city has created some significant hardships for our communities. Everyone deserves access to stable and affordable healthy housing that has convenient access to jobs and educational opportunities, grocery stores, healthcare, and the other health-supporting goods and services that we need every day. And housing, especially the condition, the affordability, and the location of that housing, is one of the most important social determinants of health. Poor housing impacts can range from really specific and treatable illnesses like asthma to lifelong poor educational attainment and lifelong poor health outcomes. And this is especially true for impacts that begin in early childhood. So to achieve the prosperous and educated, healthy, and equitable Portland that we say that we want in the Portland Plan, we've really got to start with the basics. And it doesn't get more basic than a roof over your head. And if that's a living roof that's accompanied by bike racks and public art and open space, that's a fully supportive environment. That's great. But we really have to begin with the highest priority. And from a public health perspective, that's getting that roof over your head to begin with. So we're really excited to get to support Commissioner Saltzman's resolution, and we hope that you will do so too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
The next three are Diane Lynn, Kat Gugner, and Bob Solinger.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We'll jump right in. My name's Diane Lynn. I'm director at Proud Ground. We provide permanent affordable homeownership opportunities to working families. I'll do you the service of truncating my comments, much of which has already been said, but let me reemphasize a couple very important points, I believe. We are here to support the resolution Commissioner Saltzman has brought forward, and clearly his leadership on this reflects his understanding of the need to bring more tools to the table and really start emphasizing, as you've already heard, the priority of making Portland or keeping Portland or improving the inclusivity and the diversity of this extraordinary city. In light of the state legislator's stunning failure this session to pass the bill that would have removed the ban on inclusionary zoning statewide, as you've already heard from John Ogier, this is a step in the direction of what we can do now. You should know, and thanks to your support on that with that bill, and along with your colleagues around the state, because this is a statewide issue, we will be back to take on that issue again in Salem until we win the day on that. Oregon is better than this. In the meantime, we can't support enough the step in the direction of really testing these incentives and seeing how they're calibrated and how they work, so we can, continue to improve on them and hopefully bring a mandatory component to it. This is a fix to the bonus program so we can capture the value of the densities that you've heard and use it for the greatest public good, again, as you've heard already, very important housing issues. We've come a long way. We've got a very, very long way to go to provide Portlanders with an affordable unit of housing. And we've already heard that the greatest need is for families with children, communities of color, those with disabilities, people with limited incomes. This policy would incent the private market to help create that workforce housing that you've already heard so much about for the 60 to 80% of median income that we serve at Proud Ground. We have half of the families in the Proud Ground homes region-wide are families of color or have people in them that have that are people of color. And that has to do with a very effective targeted outreach effort. We can do that. And as the Bureau representative said, Javier, we need to do that and stay committed to that. There are 400 families on our wait list right now. 60% of them are people of color, between 60 and 80% of the median income. This is part of the continuum of housing support that we desperately need to allow people who are stable in their jobs to move into more stable housing, to free up some of those critical units and target the public dollar that's so precious to the city and the county to the 0 to 60% of median income that you're addressing, Commissioner Fritz, of which we're all deeply committed to. That's the kind of crisis on the front lines of moving people out of homelessness. But we need to broaden our options and allow families to move along. There is a tremendous gap, and people of color who are working deserve a chance to live in downtown, and the money that could be used in lieu of could really help support more housing across the boards at below 60%. So final point, this is also why we are deeply committed to the Welcome Home campaign, along with those 95 other agencies you've heard about, to win a dedicated source of revenue to fund affordable housing locally. And we're here, and we're going to rely on your support urgently for that. Growing the pie and expanding our tools is what we desperately need to do every opportunity we get. And we thank Commissioner Saltzman for his leadership, and we ask that all of you support this resolution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Kat.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Kat Gogenauer. I'm principal at Radix Consulting Group and policy advocate for Portland's African American communities. I'm also a member of the Diverse 22 organization, Strong Anti-Displacement PDX Coalition. I believe we've provided a letter for you today. We've been working with BPS staff and the PSC members in a collaborative, inclusive, and equitable process to use this iteration of the comprehensive plan to assess, prioritize, and respond to the needs of our most vulnerable community members. And our coalition is in support of Commissioner Saltzman's bold resolution for incentive housing or zoning. As we approach this next generation of development through an equity lens, we must really ask ourselves, development for whom and equity for whom? Given the acknowledged and expanding post-recovery housing crisis, disparately impacting Portland's protected class population, specifically African Americans and Native Americans, and our local jurisdictional and state duty to affirmatively further fair housing, there's an urgent need to prioritize and direct this public benefit to affordable housing. In the past weeks, we've experienced highs and lows. The lows being the persistence of the bans on inclusionary zoning and rent control, which limit the tools at hand to strengthen tenant protections and provide affordable housing. The highs reflected in HUD's rulings on disparate impact and AFFH, or affirmatively furthering fair housing. In light of the latter, we must remember that while prioritizing affordable housing is important, prioritizing the siting of affordable housing in areas of high opportunity is essential. The AFFH mandate sets a path for government to intentionally integrate low-income and protected class communities into areas of affluence and opportunity rather than continuing to suburbanize and concentrate poverty. One of the goals of the Fair Housing Act is to reduce segregation. The 2011 analysis of impediments says there are census blocks in Multnomah County where people of color are concentrated, defined as over 51%, but that no communities are exclusively segregated except areas that are primarily white. And it also says that in Multnomah County, those higher income areas are also areas of low diversity. In planning for the changing demographics of the region, we must remember that we also have an obligation and opportunity to uplift those that have been left behind as the economy moved from recession to recovery. In thinking about public-private partnerships and affordable housing, it's important to remember that HUD's duty to AFFH reads, although the grantee's AFFH obligation arises in connection with the receipt of federal funding, its AFFH obligation is not restricted to the design and operation of HUD-funded programs at the state or local level. The AFFH obligation extends to all housing and housing-related activities in the grantee's jurisdictional area, whether publicly or privately funded. Thank you for considering this important first step in responding to our region's housing crisis.
Thank you.
Let me just make one comment if I could, and I'd throw in the Supreme Court for not reversing 40 years of law on disparate impact as another win, but
I did put that in there.
I just want to be very clear about something. Not a single person is raising an argument that we shouldn't invest in opportunity areas. So we're going to hear a lot of the testimony is making that point, and I believe passionately we should invest in opportunity areas. And we get a lot of mail and communications from people that scratch their head, that can't quite figure out why we're investing in high opportunity areas where we can stretch the dollar in an area of low opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And we explain to them that healthy families, families do better in places of high opportunity. So that's why we invest in Southwest Portland. That's why we invest in South Waterfront and other places. So I think the statement you just made about the interplay between fair housing and opportunity, if you have it in writing, I'm going to put it on my website because I think it's one of the best statements of principle I've heard. And I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but I fear we're losing the battle in terms of housing the people that Home Forward houses. And I know why nonprofit developers are anxious about serving that community because it's highly expensive, it requires a big subsidy, we get criticized when we take public dollars and put them in as grants rather than loans. I know those arguments. But I'm going to remind us every year when we come back and look at the data, I'm going to remind us, how are we doing in addressing the people that Home Forward houses? Because the crisis in our community is not just below 80%. It's 0 to 30. And if we don't have adequate housing for people that have very little, then I think we're moving away from a commitment we made 20 years ago. Now, and again, I understand why even the nonprofit community is resistant, because it's high cost and it has other challenges. But we're going to come back every year and look at our progress on 0 to 30, because I for one, am not going to cede the ground on that community of need, simply because we face challenges. And I think under the Fair Housing Act, I think it's a particularly urgent part of our agenda.
Commissioner Fish, that is exactly why the Welcome Home and the new revenues that we could generate from that's exactly the argument we're going to need to make about that, because generating new revenue, as we all know, is very, very difficult.
What I just said is 1/3 as eloquent as what she said, because what she just said about fair housing and opportunity should be in the charter of the city of Portland.
Thank you.
Bob, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Salinger. I'm the Conservation Director for the Audubon Society of Portland. Audubon has a long history of supporting affordable housing. In fact, I think the very first time I testified before this commission, was in favor of the TIF set-asides. And we're generally supportive of Commissioner Saltzman's prioritizing of bonuses and transfers for affordable housing here. We did, however, want to flag a couple of issues, and I sent you a letter earlier as well regarding some of the other bonuses and transfers. And it's not clear to us right now whether prioritizing means eliminating those or creating incentives that push that forward faster. But we did want to flag a couple. So green roofs. I've heard a couple of times today and elsewhere that the market would take care of this. We don't need to worry about it. Or alternatively, we could come back and make it mandatory. We heard the exact same thing a couple of years ago when BES eliminated its incentive program as well. The fact is that the market's not taking care of it. The city is far behind its goals. It came nowhere close to meeting its eco-roof goal in gray to green, missed it by close to 50%. And we know that we're falling behind other cities that do have good incentive programs and mandatory programs, including Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Washington, D.C., Austin. France just made eco-roofs mandatory. On every building in a commercial zone, you have to put an eco-roof on or solar panels. We're falling behind. We've lost the edge here. So what I'd say to you on eco-roofs is that the market's not taking care of it, and we would certainly support a mandatory eco-roof program But we'd like to see that done in conjunction with this, that if we're going to eliminate the bonuses, let's move to mandatory and go that direction. But we are concerned about simply leaving it to the market or leaving it to a future process where we might consider that and losing the one incentive we have left.
So Bob, on that
Sure.
point, can I just ask you a question? It won't count against your time. So I raised this question with Joe earlier and in light of the timeline. So what if we were today to ask planning and sustainability as part of the review process over the next year when they, prior to coming back to us, if with respect to green roofs, they considered alternatives to an incentive-based program and came back to us with some options to consider when we have to make the final decision about which incentives are in and out.
That would be great. That would make us very happy, and we think that is the right direction to go. We think it should come off the bonus system and move into the mandatory arena, so we'd love to see the city start to really explore whether that's a route that they want to go or not.
Did we not already do that in the West Quadrant plan?
All we agreed to in the West Quadrant plan was that we would consider it at some point in the future, and that's sort of where we've been at for several years in a variety of planning processes. It's something we ought to look at, think about, we'll get to it someday. But if we're going to get rid of the bonuses, I think now is the time to actually pull the trigger on that.
So we'll try to come up with the right language, but I had intended to offer an amendment to in essence, ask BPS to come back with options as part of this process, since I don't want the green roofs just sort of pushed to the side and then forgotten.
Okay, we really appreciate that. The other two issues I'm going to raise very briefly are of lower concern, but I just want to capture the fact that these things are complex and we need to be thinking about them, if not through this mechanism, then through others. One is the Willamette River Greenway transfer. Having worked on the various river planning processes, I know one of the things we talked about there was that we needed to better distribute the costs of restoring the Greenway and creating access on the Greenway. And one of the things that came up a lot was the bonus system, and could we do more with that so we better distributed the cost so it wasn't just put upon the properties immediately adjacent to the river. I think that's something we need to continue considering as we go forward, because it is important that we distribute the cost better and it just doesn't fall on the adjacent property owners. And that is an equity issue as well, because one of the arguments they'll make is that we're putting blue-collar jobs on the line when we put all the load on them. So that's number one. Number two is the open space bonuses. There's a suggestion we should just use transfers rather than bonuses because the open space you can get through bonuses is too small to really be significant. We would challenge that. The reality is in the central city, we need to be innovative in terms of finding open space, and that may be a very small pocket park, it may be an accessible eco roof, but we need to be innovative, so I think we need to think carefully about whether we want to just move to a transfer system exclusively or whether the bonuses still make sense there. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, others?
The last person who signed up is Rehana Ansuri.
And anyone else that wants to speak, come on up, please.
Hello, good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Rehana Ansuri here on behalf of the Portland Business Alliance to testify on the Central City Floor Area Ratio bonus and transfer resolution before you today. My comments largely reflect a letter that we sent to City Council yesterday. First, we too are concerned about housing affordability. Our recent report on middle-income jobs shows that housing affordability is a growing concern, with a minimum medium household income of $70,000 required per year to purchase a home in most of the city of Portland today. As our data show, we believe affordability is a growing issue, not just for low-income households, but also for middle-income households. We therefore urge that any proposed affordable housing bonus program apply to households up to 100% MFI. We don't feel it necessary to eliminate many of the current bonus and transfer options to achieve the city's affordable housing goals. The current bonus and transfer system supports the city's goals for density, encourages amenities that support other city goals, and allows for greater architectural creativity. Instead of removing bonus options, such as those for bike storage facilities that are working, the city should explore mechanisms to incent and make more attractive a new affordable housing bonus. For example, the 3-to-1 cap on bonus FAR that can be used on a single site could be raised for affordable housing. If this additional entitlement were allowed, it would make this affordable housing bonus attractive to developers and drive its use even among the other bonus options. Should this proposal move forward, we strongly recommend that it be revisited on a yearly basis, at least for the first few years, to evaluate how it's performing and make adjustments if needed. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. We look forward to working with you to advance our common goals around housing affordability.
Hi, I'm Susan Pierce. I live in the Hosford Abernathy neighborhood. But I'm speaking to at this moment as an individual. I didn't come with prepared comments, so I'll try not to stumble around too much. I just have been very pleased with everything I've heard today. I want not to add to, I'm going to add to the confusion just a little maybe, but not want to add to any competition between income levels, even up to the 100%. I'm very conscious of the struggles that people, families, people of color, but it really hits home to me because one of my struggles at the moment is working with my neighbors on the issue of low-income housing, of the very, very low-income housing that may be moving into, adding to the already sizable collection of people sleeping on the streets in the Central East Side Industrial District, adding the Right to Dream 2 group to that. I have great admiration with what Right to Dream 2 is doing, but I am bucking up against some resistance from some of the neighbors, and I've spent a lot of time trying to say these people need a place to sleep. Where else is there? And what I've heard today just confirms what I've been trying to say in terms of the need for housing, even for that very, very low-income group. So just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Yes, my name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Watchdog X. Again, Commissioner Saltzman, everything is precision. I do agree with you on this resolution. I think it's very well thought out. There's a couple problems I do have is that I don't think a lot of developers are going to take advantage of a lot of these bonuses. And I agree with a lot of the developers. They got to make their numbers work. These land values are very high. As we know, the largest land bank in this city is the city of Portland. You control most of the land. And the thing about it is that what I see here is that I like that affordable housing fund. I want to have a more understanding on kind of what your plans are when money goes into the fund. I like the fact you're focusing on the 0 to 30%. In my opinion, the developers are doing an outstanding job through the marketplace. And I've always stated they need more incentives. Keep them building the units they think they need to build. Reality is the more supply out there will begin to drop the prices in rent. People may debate with me on that, but it's clear that we have a shortage of housing. That's what the developers do. They need to build more housing. Don't impede the developers, keep them building. But we need to focus, again, which you have done, Commissioner Saltzman, on that 0 to 30% by your housing fund. That is the most important area to focus on. Those are the people on the sidewalks. Those are the people in the doorways. Those are the people that need the housing the most in this city. Those are the people that need additional service to take care of them. And you're focusing on that, so I do commend you on that. The only other issue, again, is that on this plan, we've heard from developers, it's going to be very difficult to take advantage of this bonus system. I agree with them on that. Can the city do anything for them on land, on making sure that they can build some of these projects? That is for the city to review. Another issue I have here is just when we're talking being able to take advantage of some of the bonuses and having to be restricted to 60 years, to me, that's just an outdated number for what we're going through out in this city. That has to be reduced. That number needs to be reduced at least by 50%, in my opinion. And we need to not mess around with the SDCs and keep the developers building and keep them doing what they're doing and don't impede their progress. That provides more housing. Your housing fund gets the 0 to 30% into housing. So I respect you on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, anyone else? All right.
So Mayor, I have two friendly amendments to
Okay.
offer, and I've reviewed them with Dan's staff, and I'm going to try to state them succinctly. The first is that when a set of recommendations come back to us in July of 2016, I request that as part of that, the proposal set forth the then proposed guidelines for the Housing Investment Fund that would guide how the funds that are paid in lieu of are to be spent going forward. And that's my first amendment.
I'm sorry, but can you give us some language for that? Because the function of this resolution is directing the Planning and Sustainability Bureau to do certain work. So maybe if you could,
Actually, it directs 3 bureaus, Mayor.
yeah,
Right, so
so
it would be another, therefore be it resolved
that.
that when this comes back, it will come with what he just asked for.
Okay.
With proposed guidelines for how the payment in lieu will be spent, or the guidelines governing expenditures of the payment in lieu that are placed in the Housing Investment Fund.
Second.
Okay, and it's directing the Housing Bureau to do this?
Yeah, that would
Yeah,
be the
the
most
first
appropriate.
now therefore be resolved directs.
Oops, sorry. What button do I push?
Pardon me?
Do I push a button or, oh, okay. Would you mind if it just said for the payment in lieu and not specify what fund it goes into? We don't know, not that it wouldn't go into the Housing Investment Fund, but I
Oh,
don't
yeah,
know that that's.
I want it to be
into
as
the
broad as
payment.
possible, but so, and I think we've been in council so long this week, I think we're all beginning to get mushy-headed. So it can be another
It would be
resolve.
I, it would be,
Or it can just simply be
No,
an
that's not-
I that,
It's not.
It
Those are
may
the
be best
principles
to-
the planning commission's
I
supposed to
see,
consider.
I see.
Oh,
So
you're
let's
right.
do it as a separate
You're right.
resolve,
be it further resolved.
that the Housing Bureau will present proposed guidelines for how the payment in lieu shall be allocated,
Okay,
invested, whatever the right, John, am I close enough?
I second it again.
okay, got it.
And my second amendment is, and I had previously talked to Joe about this, and I ran it by Shannon, I would like the eco-roof issue to remain on the table for the commission to consider as a incentive bonus, but with primarily in order that they can come back and present us with alternatives.
Commissioner, I have a friendly wording language on that.
I'm struggling with wording today. I take any
So-
lifeline you want to throw
So
me.
this would be an I, and it would be something on the lines of the merits of other current bonuses that should or should not be continued or be made mandatory as part of the comprehensive
Maybe the
plan.
functional verb would be review.
No, because
Well, there are verbs at the beginning. of
guiding
each-
principles.
Right.
Would the
Support,
verb-
ensure, explore.
Okay.
What do you want them to do?
Are you asking for a comparison or an analysis of the
Analyze,
various?
maybe.
the- of
Yes,
the
analyze
various-
is a good one, Mayor, thank you.
Analyze the function
This is
of,
sausage-making by the
yeah, well,
council.
that's okay.
Yeah,
It's a
analyze the
resol-
merits of other current bonuses that should or should not be continued or made mandatory as part of the comprehensive plan.
So that makes it slightly broader, but would include my concern that eco-roof be, that there be an assessment of its utility as a incentive bonus and alternatives to that approach.
So it'd be
Joe's
analyze the
nodding.
merits of other current bonuses that should be continued or made mandatory. How about that?
Yes, there we go. That's cleaner.
And I think by way of legislative history, the PowerPoint and the discussion makes clear that priorities, calibrated to market, and penciling out are the filter for this. And so we should clear the brush of everything that doesn't even remotely fit into those tubs. And if there's something left, and I'd ask that eco-roofs in particular be focused on, that you give us a menu of options if we are to remove it as a part of the incentive bonus plan.
Okay.
That's
I
my
second that one.
amendment.
All right, so now, any
Amended.
further recommended amendments?
I have several.
Okay.
And Commissioner Saltzman, this has been a really good presentation. I apologize that I haven't been able to bring you my amendments beforehand because I didn't think I was going to be able to support it, but I am going to be able to. I hope we can get to some clarifications here.
It's a good incentive.
In the now therefore be it resolved, the first part, I think we need to clarify that instead of the bureaus, so I'm now down on the third line, it says other city bureaus to propose changes. I think it would be ask the Planning and Sustainability Commission to consider changes. It does have to go through the Planning and Sustainability Commission.
Okay, that sounds good.
And
Why
then-
don't, I have a suggestion, which is, how about adding the word develop before proposed? Because that's what the bureaus do. The bureaus develop proposed changes, and then they go to the planning commission, and then they come to us. Or prepare. In other words, we get to direct our bureau. This is,
I just want to make it clear that there's a public process. I was
I understand that.
disconcerted last night getting an email from Mike Houck at 10:30 in the evening. He's a member of the Planning and Sustainability
right.
Commission, didn't realize that this was going forward. So I suspect, given that we had one non-housing advocate here, that there might be some folks who'd be concerned about other things. So I want to be really clear that it's going to go through a public process.
Right. No, I share the intent. I was just trying to wordsmith. What do you think, Joe? How do we do this?
Well, there's two options, but one is even at the end, maybe this helps. It's in the implementation, where is that sentence? Oh, that be it further resolved, that the very last, be it further resolved. And if you go down, we're going to craft changes to the zoning code reflecting these principles.
No, that's the problem, Joe. I don't think we should be saying we want them to consider them, but it's a principle that under state law, things are supposed to bubble up from the Planning Commission rather than us directing them to do it.
But here, so I wasn't
He
finished.
was going to add some language.
Yeah, and then that you're requesting us to undertake a legislative process and bring the recommendations of that process to the city council no later than you name the date. And so that's how we usually do it, Commissioner. You tell us to consider this and bring it forward as and put it through a legislative process, which means Planning and Sustainability Commission and City Council. And I'm only offering that because I think it covers it, a lot of this, what you're concerned about, in one statement, but however you want to do it, honestly, that is how this will take place.
So the point is that we're not putting any sideboards on the commission's deliberations or actions. So they can accept it, reject it, they can recommend conditions, can modify it in the ordinary course.
So my
Absolutely.
language, my proposed language was to say, first two lines, and other city bureaus ask the Planning and Sustainability Commission to consider changes in the city zoning code for the central city, including but not limited to the following guiding principles, which makes it really clear.
Okay, that is fine. Thank
Thank you.
Sorry.
Second?
I'll get that to you, Carla. Thank you, Commissioner.
That was
And then
that's
my-
in the first resolve? Is that right?
That's
Yeah, that's
to
in
the
the
first
now
now
therefore be it
now
resolved.
therefore. And then under G, the things that they're supposed to consider, that support historic preservation, the development of privately owned public open space through the FAR transfer provisions. That to me read only that. So I would like to respond to the testimony by adding comma, FAR bonuses or other support mechanisms. Because I do think we need to have a more thorough discussion of how do we promote historic
You
preservation.
mean FAR transfer provisions or other bonuses? Sorry, now it says FAR transfer provision.
Yes, add to that comma,
Right.
FAR bonuses
Oh, all right.
and/or other support mechanisms.
So that's a Fourth Amendment. I'll second that.
Thank you.
Joe, you've heard us attempt to articulate all four amendments, and we'll scrub the language. Do you have any objections to them?
No, actually, that's would be the standard course, and it makes it much more clear that that's the expectation, excuse me, so that's good.
Thank you. And then I'm sorry, did you have a question about that, Commissioner?
I just want to say, Shannon, so far, so you're doing the heavy lifting here. Are we okay on these four?
I think I captured that. G, So we'll walk through these again before we
I
act.
can restate it. The final concern I have is with the discussion we had right at the beginning as far as setting the July 1 deadline for implementation, that I think it might be better to just word it to bring proposed changes to council as part of the comprehensive plan update.
And actually, it would be the adoption of the Central City 2035 plan.
Whatever that is, then, okay, say
And-
that.
And that actually makes us able to implement this more quickly because it's a post-acknowledgement plan on the comp plan that could still be under review at DLCD.
So instead,
would-
could you
that
tell us
would-
the language we want there, other than to implement changes no later? Just bring proposed changes to council as part of?
The adoption of the Central City 2035 plan, and you could say expected at City Council by July 2016, if that's important to keep in.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like, maybe I'm just imagining that, but it seems like our deadline for adopting the comp plan keeps adjusting every 6 months to be a year around the horizon. So I'd like to keep the pressure on to do these changes by a year from now.
And that was actually part of the reason that I'm raising this, is then to ask you, might it go in a separate parallel track? Does it, Joe, does it have to come as part of the Central City Plan?
The fastest track is part of the Central City Plan, and so if you want to include that is expected here by July 1st, 2016, it'll be getting here then, and that's our intent, Commissioner. And actually, we've moved at the direction of the mayor, moved that timeline up. We're committed to get
Guess
this
I
done
would-
as soon
I
as the
would
comp
ass-
plan goes through.
Yeah, I'd offer that reassurance, Commissioner Saltzman. I'm interested in doing this soon as well, but you can believe me that I will keep the pressure on the Bureau to maintain the schedule.
And I can assure you that's so.
Okay.
All right, I'll second that amendment.
I don't want to have to replay this tape for us all.
Me neither. So, any further amendments? So let me make sure we walk through those and see if we want to adopt them as a body. So what I have is that in now therefore be it resolved, that it will state that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability will work with those bureaus and prepare proposals for the Planning and Sustainability Commission to consider, and then go on with the language that's there now, right?
Except instead of using,
I didn't
say-
capture that word for word as I think I did in some
You
other
got
cases.
close, but you, instead of using included but not limited to.
Okay. Then I have a change to G, which adds after the words provisions, or FAR bonuses, comma, FAR bonuses and/or other mechanisms in the zoning code, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Then I have an addition of a sub-I that says, analyze the merits of other current bonuses that should be continued or made mandatory. And I have a change to the final, be it further resolved, that adds after the word "to" in the second line, undertake a legislative process to implement any changes, and then striking the no later date, no later phrase, adding the phrase, in the adoption of the Central City 2035 plan.
Good job.
Did I get it all?
I think you're doing out of classification work, but I have to compliment
Yeah, well, you
you.
know,
Did I miss
quit
the
my
0
day
to
job.
60 piece, or did he say that?
I'm sorry?
The guidelines for the payment.
Oh,
of
the
bill.
guidelines.
That's another issue.
I'm
right?
sorry, I
That's
missed
another-
that. That's a be it further resolved that will now appear at the end of the document, that the Portland Housing Bureau will prepare proposed guidelines for how payment in lieu will be allocated.
Yeah, I think that's broad enough, so.
I just wanted, on your last amendment to the last, be it further resolved, there was something about the comp plan, which is expected in July.
Which is expected by the end, by July.
Okay, which is expected
Right.
to be completed by July 2016. We don't have to put a date on that one. We'll give them the whole month.
Yay.
Mayor, going back to the first amendment in the first, now
Yeah.
therefore be it resolved, where is the modifying language of including but not limited to? Where
It's
was that?
Instead of the word using. After Central City in the third sentence, third line.
It would say, go ahead and give him verbiage, Amanda. if you-
It would say, consider changes in the city zoning code for the central city, including but not limited to the following guiding principles.
So is the intent of that then that the A through now I guidelines be suggestive as opposed to being the expectation that that will be the filter by which the recommendation will be processed?
I think a guiding principle is definitely directive, but that there may be other things that communities who are interested in the other issues might wish to bring to the Planning Commission's attention, and I personally would prefer for the commission to be able to consider those.
Yes. Shannon?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you.
So Mayor, I move amendments 1 through 5 as package A.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion about those amendments?
And then after this vote, we'll take a vote on the resolution.
Correct. Okay, roll call on the package of amendments as just iterated and hopefully captured in text.
Saltzman,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Fish,
I just have to say, I always get a kick out of it when I get an email saying we don't do our business in public. I think we're a pretty transparent body, and this is democracy in action. Aye.
Hales.
Sometimes they might wish that we did not. Aye. Roll call on the resolution itself.
Saltzman,
Well, I appreciate this discussion today and the support of the city council. I think we all recognize that access to good jobs, transportation options, strong schools are the building blocks for family success. Without affordable housing in our most amenity-rich areas of the city, we are in jeopardy of becoming a city that does not represent the values that Portlanders share. Portland is missing a major tool in our toolbox, the best practice that many cities already employ to develop affordable housing, and that is the incentive zoning program. The time is now to develop such a program, and I would like to acknowledge and thank Barbara Shaw and Javier Mena of the Housing Bureau for their hard work on this proposal. From Planning and Sustainability, Joe Zender, Rachel Hoy, Catherine Hartinger, and Tyler Bump deserve sincere thanks for their work to date and the future work they will do on this proposal. And I want to thank Mayor Hales and for his initial co-sponsorship of this proposal, and to Jackie Dingfelder and Julian Detweiler of his staff for their support. Thank you for all of those who showed up to testify today. And I also want to thank David Schwartz, our consultant, also for doing some fine analytic work. And as I said at the outset, I tend to be impatient on these things, but I feel comforting in knowing that all of us will be watching very closely the clock on getting these proposals up and running and truly providing more affordable housing in our community. And Shannon Callahan of my office, of course, how could I forget Shannon, for her help as well. Thank you. Aye.
Fritz.
I reiterate the thanks to all involved, Joe Zender and Shannon and Javier and Commissioner Saltzman and Mayor Hales' portfolio, also Claire Adamsick and Tom Bizot in my office. Appreciate the testimony today. It's been very, very helpful to me. I especially appreciated the Portland Business Alliance referring to the income level that we're talking about as middle income. And I think it's very important to remember that when we talk about workforce housing, people who make minimum wage are also part of the workforce. They are also part of the working class, and to suggest that they are somehow less of the workforce than those who make 80% of the median income, I think is a disservice. So I personally am training myself to not refer to workforce housing or to refer to it as middle income housing. This plan will hopefully get 35 to 60 additional units at 60 to 80%, which is better than not having 35 to 50 additional units, especially if it came to be per year. I, as I said, was prepared to vote no because I am very concerned that the communities of color most need to have the housing at 0 to 60% based on the demographics that the Housing Bureau so helpfully put together. I am persuaded by the testimony that we heard from the communities of color that I need to take their advice as I strive to make policies that become equitable and racially fair. So I personally would have said that we should have made it 0 to 60, because I think that would have made it much more likely that we would get more money into the affordable housing funds. But I am taking the advice of my constituents. And again, thank you, Commissioner Saltzman. Aye.
Fish.
Dan, thanks for your leadership on this. I think this is an innovative idea. I think it advances our opportunity agenda. I like what Jonathan said about on-site units creating certainty, which I don't think I'd given enough thought to. It adds another tool to our toolkit, and it doesn't divert $1 of taxpayer resources to this program, as you noted at the outset. So you're adding new value. And frankly, as I've struggled with this a little bit because of who we're serving, I think we ought to be a little more flexible when we're talking about a new tool that doesn't constrict our existing tools but expands the pie. And I hope this is successful. I will, however, on a regular basis, come back to, I think, a fundamental part of the problem that faces our community that is increasingly getting short shrift, which is people who have nothing. And if we subscribe to the view that we want maximum bang for our buck, we'll go against our opportunity agenda. If we subscribe to the view that we shouldn't stretch and use more grant money than loan money, then we're going to back off 0 to 30. And if we subscribe to the view that it's harder to house the poorest of the poor, the problem will get worse, not better. And I understand all the headwinds that we face, but I think we have to insist that that documented group of need, which is the biggest documented group of need, never fall off our radar in terms of a priority population. But I think this really is a legacy proposal, Dan, and it would not happen without your customary bulldog approach, and I want to compliment you for that, and thank you. Aye.
Hales.
Well, the affordable housing crisis in Portland is really serious. And this proposal, Commissioner Saltzman, is a serious effort to use a complicated tool, our incentive program, to try to make a difference in that big, complex issue. And Joe may know this story. I think Josh may know it. But even though this is a serious issue, whenever I think about a big, complex public policy issue, I have an irreverent thought based on a line in a movie. The movie was called The Dream is Alive, and it was an IMAX film that used to be shown at the Air and Space Museum. And it's a very dramatic moment in which a team of astronauts with the shuttle doors open and one out in space and another operating the arm are attempting to capture a satellite called Solar Max that was the size of a school bus and rotating once a second on its axis. It had to be stopped, opened up, and a circuit board replaced in order to make it function. And so there was a very burly Texan named Ox, they all have nicknames, these astronauts, out in space ready to use the tools. And there was a fast-talking New Yorker named Pinky inside operating the shuttle arm. I guess he got the nickname from his delicate touch. And they're in contact with the ground control guy down in Houston. And so there are those beeps and buzzes. And they're trying to align the camera so that Houston can watch them capture the satellite. And so Ox would talk and Pinky would talk. And Pinky finally gets this, they're sweating this, and they finally get this thing lined up. And Pinky says, "Is that right? Is that right?" Houston said, "You got it. That's right. Man, that's a beautiful satellite." Ox, who hasn't said much up to this point, just interjects, "Doesn't work." This is a big, complicated mechanism that doesn't really work. It's only getting a 33% utilization. It is being used for housing that would probably be built in the market anyway. It's being used for bike racks that are being overbuilt to our standards. And it's being used for eco roofs that have become pretty much standard issue and anything better than a LEED silver building. So it is time, and I want to take Ms. Ansari's suggestion very seriously, not only to make sure that we tune this thing so that it does actually work, and that might mean making it more generous than even it is now, but also reviewing it more often than we have to make sure that it's working. Because if it's an incentive, and we kind of got regrounded in that in this discussion today, if it's an incentive as opposed to a mandate, and we're more comfortable maybe or more practiced in thinking about mandates in these things, if it's an incentive, it has to work in the marketplace. it has to work in the market. People have to say, I want to do this. It makes it worth my while. We had that in Oregon for solar panels for a while, here in Portland especially. And now the incentives aren't quite so good, and not as many people are installing solar panels. So these things have to work, and I'm going to be very interested to monitor this more carefully after we retune it this way to make sure that it actually works. So Commissioner Saltzman, thanks for your energy and leadership on this. I really appreciate it. I think this was overdue. And to focus on affordable housing and to maybe make this complicated machine a little simpler and maybe a little more effective in the bargain is good public policy. Thank you all for good work, and we look forward to making it real in the Central City 2030 plan no later than July of next year. Aye. Thank you.
I'll hold you to that.
Thank you all.
Hold us all to that, I guess. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Let's take a momentary break, and then we'll return to our final item of the afternoon.
Amanda, thanks.
revised noise regulations for pile driving.
Okay, with no particular fanfare, let me turn it over to the chair of our Noise Review Board and our Noise Control Officer for their presentation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Paul Van Orden, the city's Noise Control Officer in the Office of Neighborhood Involvement. Going to jump right into our project, which has three primary components. There are some pile driver code changes we're going to discuss. There are some suggested changes from the Noise Review Board to our location for appeals for the noise variances. And there is a change to our definition of EX zoning that I'll be discussing. So the chair of the Noise Review Board is going to start off with some background on why this project at this particular point in time for the Noise Review Board. I'll follow up with a little bit more background on the outreach on the project, and then after that, an explanation of the three primary components that we're bringing forward today for code changes. And David Sweet, the chair, will take over from here.
Thank you, Paul. Mayor, Commissioners, David Sweet, Chair of the Noise Review Board. I don't have to tell you that construction activity is booming in Portland right now with pent-up demand from the recession, and things are going great. And it's particularly impacting people in a couple areas of the city, and in particular the Pearl District, which is already heavily populated. And now with all the building going on there, people are being subjected to quite a bit of noise. Noise is regulated under Title 18, the Noise Code, pretty much the same way it has been since 1976. Most construction activities are limited to no more than a certain decibel level, but certain activities such as pile driving, scraping, concrete saws, rock drills, are exempt from those standards because they couldn't meet them. They couldn't meet any reasonable standard. They're too loud. Rather than set an unreasonable standard, the council in 76 set hour limits on construction activity. Noise from construction is allowed from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday. Outside of those hours, it must meet the same restrictions as any other noise source, entertainment, a stereo, a factory whistle, anything else. Now, in May of 2014, at our Noise Review Board meeting, more than a dozen residents of the Pearl District came and spoke with us about the impact that pile driving was having on their lives. And pile driving is a particularly loud and disturbing sound, and we are aware that it is a health hazard. So we're grateful that these people came forward to tell us about their experience. In response to that, the Noise Review Board set aside its work plan and to focus on the pile driving issue to see what would be appropriate for any changes to the noise code to bring before you. We have studied it since the fall of 2014, and we've learned a lot about it. We've learned that there's apparently no practical way to reduce the sound of pile driving at the source. It is a hammer hitting a pile. You can't muffle it. People have tried building a barrier around it, but since the pile is constantly moving down, that barrier would have to be hoisted into place by a separate crane and moved down as the pile is driven into the ground. And we were persuaded through testimony that this would decrease safety on the work site, and we were uncomfortable recommending it. We saw no other way to actually reduce the sound of pile driving. We heard testimony that there are other ways of placing piles other than driving them. And one in particular, continuous flight augering, is a way to auger rather than drive, and as the auger is withdrawn, concrete is poured into the hole to place a pile. It's much quieter, and we heard testimony from geotechnical engineers that while this is appropriate for some buildings in some locations, it's not appropriate for every building in every location, and it really needs to be up to the engineer, the project engineer, to make that call as to what technique needs to be used. There are other methods such as vibrating piles or hydraulically pressing the piles into the ground, also not necessarily appropriate, particularly in the Pearl District, where piles sometimes need to go as deep as 120 feet. So with no practical way to mitigate it, and we did not feel comfortable limiting the technique for placing piles, we were left with the only method that we could see available, and that is to limit the hours when pile driving takes place. And we heard from residents that if we gave them some additional time in the morning and perhaps weekends off from this particularly disturbing activity, that would help. And therefore, that's what we are proposing, is that for pile driving, unlike other forms of construction activity, that it not start before 8 a.m. rather than 7 a.m., and that it be allowed Monday through Friday, not on Saturday or Sunday, to give people relief, an extra hour in the morning, and relief on weekends. We are also proposing that nearby residents be given notice when pile driving is going to take place. Research has shown that when people understand what noise is coming and why it is going to happen, it is less disturbing to them than when it's suddenly there. So we feel that this notice, while it will place an extra burden on developers, is important enough that there's a public purpose in doing it. In examining noise issues in the Pearl, we also noted that most of the Pearl District is zoned central employment, or EX, and the noise code classifies the EX zone as an industrial zone. Industrial zones are permitted more noise than commercial zones, which are permitted more noise than residential zones. And looking around the city, we saw that most of the uses going in central employment zones are mixed-use residential commercial, and we felt that it might be appropriate to change the way the noise code considers that zone to call it a commercial zone rather than an industrial zone. And this would reduce the amount of noise permitted in those zones outside of the permitted construction hours. And some construction activity certainly can occur outside of the permitted hours, but it needs to be quieter. This change would reduce that further and offer greater protection in the Pearl and on Williams Avenue and other places that have that zoning. Thanks to Commissioner Fritz for pointing out to us that there is also EX zoning in the Central East Side District, and after we formulated our recommendations, we did manage to consult and meet with the Central East Side Industrial Council, and were persuaded that their area should be excluded from this change, and staff will be proposing an amendment to our original proposal for the EX zone.
That's not in here today, is it?
We have.
It's not part of the ordinance from the board, but it's a staff recommendation to consider a change that I'll describe.
Okay.
The one other thing, while we've got your attention, is that we've noted recently that there have been a couple of appeals of noise variances, and this has been unusual. The noise ordinance has been around, as I say, for almost 40 years, And 40 years ago, there was no code hearings office, and council routinely heard all sorts of appeals, including appeals of nuisance abatement charges. But over that time, appeals like that, administrative appeals, have been transferred largely from the council to the code hearings office. We haven't changed the noise code in that way, I think primarily because it hasn't come up. But since it has most recently, we're also recommending that appeals of noise variances go to the code hearings officer. So those are the three changes that we've come up with in the code.
Okay, thank you.
And so I'll just jump in. So a little bit of additional comment on notification. So during this project, we not only did our normal notification, which is about 400 plus mailings to interested parties about noise, to neighborhood associations and business associations, and anyone who asks us to be on the Noise Review Board's mailing list. So each board meeting, there was a notice mailed about the meeting's agenda to those interested parties and neighborhood associations. We reached out to the Pearl District Neighborhood Association Chair, Patty Gardner, and described the project and learned that it was not one that the Pearl District Neighborhood Association saw as a major issue for them for the work that they were working on. So we wanted to make sure they were at least appraised and knew that that was a project we had running. And I'm aware that several of the board members at least followed our work, and we may even hear some testimony on perspectives from individuals on the board today. We were successful in reaching out to the development industry, which we didn't necessarily have at the table initially. So I asked Kathy Couch in our office to do some outreach to a myriad of entities within the development industry, not just the developers themselves, but also the building trades. We had a geotechnical engineer from outside the city participate, and we had a geotechnical engineer with the Bureau of Development Services, Jason Butler Brown, is here today, participated in our dialogue. Then the last part of the puzzle is the noise office is regularly at neighborhood associations throughout the city. And so at any meeting that I was out, I, like a broken record, described the project we were working on. What was of most interest is understandably the pile driving issue really has a pretty tight focus on just a handful of neighborhoods at this point. So as we all understand, it is often hard to garner neighborhood involvement for an issue that sometimes is seen as outside of that particular neighborhood's impact experience or list of issues that they're focused on. So we didn't see a lot of ability to garner neighborhoods where this might be an issue in the future to come to the table, but we did try. The three elements that are on the table today before us, as the chair of the Noise Review Board described, the first one is the element of changing the hours and the days of pile driving. Pretty straightforward concept, and that's one I think should be fairly amenable to both the development industry and to the neighbors to be supportive of. Interestingly, when we did research of other cities, we did not find much of a record of something to lean on to base our changes on. The two cities that were of note were Seattle and Boston. Seattle does place limitations on their work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Mondays through Fridays, and on weekends you can work doing pile driving from 9 a.m. to 5. So a little bit of support in Seattle for the concept of both, in their case, a later start time and an earlier end time, but not necessarily support for our concept of the Saturday and Sunday limitations of no pile driving. And then Boston was an example of 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. only Monday through Friday. So that was interesting to see. But otherwise, there were a few examples that sounded like they would be wonderful and offer some direction to head in. One was New York City, where in their construction cases, their noise office gets involved in creating mitigation plans. As we interface with the City of New York, what we learned is their mitigation plan really primarily focuses on a component of requiring a noise barrier around the entire construction site. And so at first that might sound like a wonderful idea in Portland, but in New York, where they're going much deeper into the ground, and they often have a different set of parameters for being able to solidify their buildings and make sure that they're safe from a stability standpoint, a structural standpoint. It doesn't help us in Portland because in New York, they're down so far in the hole that the work they're doing is shielded by the barrier up at the top ground level, whereas in Portland, where most of our work is high enough up off the ground that a barrier at the ground level is up over the line of sight that the sound is going to go directly to neighbors. So you might have some positive impact as the pile gets down deeper on a first floor issue. So maybe the first floor, which is primarily in the case of the Pearl commercial uses, but you would not have a beneficial impact on the second floor, the third floor, so on and so forth. So that didn't really offer us help. Although on their code, it really sounds like they're doing some wonderful work. It wasn't really as applicable to the work we're doing here in Portland. So we didn't find that other cities offered us a lot of guidance on where to go with hours or changes, so we didn't head in that direction. The notification component requiring anyone doing pile driving to effectively mail all residences within 500 feet of the site would be a notable improvement. As the council heard during some of our recent appeals.
Paul, do you have a slide on that?
I don't have that. It was included in the actual language of the code changes themselves.
Are you through with this slide?
Yes. So I'll just read the language in case it's not in front of you directly. The owner of a site on which pile driving will occur shall cause a notice to be mailed to all residences within 500 feet of the site. Mailing will occur no fewer than 30 days prior to the commencement of pile driving. The notice shall list the expected starting and ending dates for pile driving and shall give a telephone number for further information. So we think that would be a positive improvement because as we learned during our appeals process, many neighbors were concerned that they were not notified of the pile driving. As we reported, our notices to building management did not necessarily make it into the hands of the neighbors. So we feel in this case, an actual direct mailing to the residents themselves would be a notable improvement for people who would not necessarily have the parameters of what the experience is going to be with pile driving. The second component, which I have up on the slide, was our exploration of could we positively change the definition of EX zoning in the noise code and make improvements in the Pearl while not impacting the rest of the city. And so the concept being that in the noise code, EX zoning is considered industrial for a determination of your sound levels under the noise code. And so in exploring the concept of reclassifying EX just in the noise code, not in Title 33, to a commercial standard for the specific decibel levels you're allowed to emanate into the community, that seemed like a notable improvement, not only for the Pearl, but not a negative improvement for the rest of the city. And it was actually an interesting element that the board was supportive of this concept because the Planning Bureau, in exploring the mixed-use zones process, will change EX zoning in the city to a CM zoning classification, which they have a series of CM zoning classifications that they'll be creating. And so realistically, from our discussion with the Planning Bureau, it looks like over the next several years, this concept of EX being really considered for the noise code, a commercial standard, is going to happen as we incorporate the CM zones into the noise code. So it's going to happen anyway in a few years, and our hope was to offer some changes in a shorter time frame for the Pearl, which, interestingly enough, this was a map you've seen two maps you've seen when we've talked about the appeals in the past. The map on the left is the Pearl, where it's almost ubiquitously EX zoning, and the map on the right is the Elliott neighborhood, where we see much more of a patchwork of zoning like we see throughout the city more commonly. So the concept being, in the case of the Pearl, we all recognize that things have changed and we really don't have an industrial fabric in the Pearl. In the case of most of our other neighborhoods, the EX zoning is patchworked around a lot of other zonings and a lot of other zoning classifications, and you don't really have much of an industrial use situation. What was most interesting is after we were finished with the formal board dialogues, we did get some helpful comment from Commissioner Fritz that we should have a dialogue with the Central East Side Industrial Council, which we did. And what came out of that dialogue was a recognition of an interesting approach to a modification that I would offer as staff to our concept of applying EX zoning throughout the city as commercial. What we determined from that dialogue is that it would be logical over the next several years before planning changes the EX zones to a CM classification to apply the existing standard of EX zoning as industrial within the Central City Plan District, but only for the east side of the river. This seemed like a reasonable approach to give the Central East Side Industrial Council and other users on the east side of the Central City Plan an opportunity to comment on what the impacts would be with this change, and that may potentially have some impacts on the CM zoning classification over time for mixed-use zones.
So the way to make that change would be in the ordinance, I believe. The way to make that change would be in section C in the lists of residential zones and commercial zones and industrial zones, where now you're striking central employment under industrial. You would not strike the words central employment, but you'd add the words in the Central East Side Industrial District, right?
Yes.
So you'd retain the classification of central employment as industrial only in the Central East Side Industrial District.
Yes. That's
But not not everything east of the river.
No.
Not everything east of the river.
Just CID, so that's everything west of 12.
And this seemed like an interesting approach just from even my past dealings with the lower Albina area, because there are a number of different operations in that area that are potentially industrial in nature and don't have a strong residential focus right next door to them like we see in the Pearl, for instance. So it seemed like this was a good fit. It may not be the perfect fit, but that would be my suggestion to council from staff, since we didn't vet that through the full process with the Noise Review Board.
Okay, sounds good to you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so just as a clarification, a question had come out of at least one of the council offices. What are we really talking about in changing the zoning from a commercial or a industrial classification to a commercial classification for EX zoning? So if you're looking at the matrix for figure 1 within the city's noise code, if you have a source of noise in industrial zone, which is on the left hand of the chart, and you go over to the right hand of the chart and go up to industrial, you'll see that the permitted level daytime, 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. is 75 decibels, whereas if you go back to the beginning of the chart and say that your source of noise is commercial, and you say that that sound is emanating to another commercial zone, because you'd be changing the EX zones next to one another in the Pearl to commercial, EX to EX, you would have a 5 dB reduction down to 70, which is significant. A 10 dB reduction is perceived as a halving of the sound that one experiences. So it's not that radical of a change, but it is a notable change that would impact my ability in our discussions on appeals to be able to say more readily that grinding metal would have exceeded the commercial standard, whereas an industrial standard, it would have been a bit harder to argue that our appeal case we had in the past where we explored the concept of grinding before 7 a.m. This would enable us to have a stronger basis for arguments about different noise sources that right now we don't have as strong a basis to say are an exceedance in the neighborhoods. The last item that we have on the table is the concept of the change of the venue for appeals from the city council to the, or not to the ombuds, to the auditor's office via the hearings officer. So that is something that we've had just a preliminary dialogue with the hearings office. And so the interesting component of that is with the recent dialogue with the city's ombudsman's office about changes to notification and changes to appeals that will be going into place with September 1st, I would suggest if we do incorporate that element, I would suggest we use a date of September 1st so that we're not operating under the old rules as well as the new rules that will be in place. And I think that fits very well with some of the things that citizens have testified to us in the past in terms of a concern for notification, a concern for more readily being able to have their issue heard by a body. We understand that the hearings officer would have an ability to hear our cases within 30 days, and as we saw with our appeals for the noise variances, we had a little bit of a stretch longer than that. So this should hopefully be a way to expedite variances being heard and not having events have occurred by the time we get to a hearing. And those are the 3 primary components that we're bringing forward today.
Great, thank you very much. Questions?
I do have some questions, but I'm mindful that citizens have been waiting for an hour and 3/4 to testify, so maybe we could hear them first.
Bring you back for questions, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's take testimony. Anyone you have signed up?
Okay, we have 12 people signed up. The first three, please come on up, are Rory Martindale, Garth Olaco, and Joel Burt.
Come on up, please. Good afternoon. Thanks for waiting.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Joel Burt, B-U-R-T, and I'm with DeWitt Construction. This is a testimony against the proposed rule change. Regarding the Noise Review Board's recommendation for the restricting the hours and the days of operation for pile driving, some relevant testimony should be heard by the council members to commissioners before the final action is taken. Under the current code, as you know, pile driving can be performed daily from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., excluding Sundays. Reducing the hours available for pile driving and eliminating Saturday work will result in extending the duration citizens are exposed to the very noise the board is trying to mitigate. We previously testified that the average pile driving project in the downtown area, specifically the Pearl region, only lasts about 3 to 4 weeks. The number of piles that can be installed for working 6 days versus 5 days can shorten a project for as much as 7 to 10 days. If these rule changes are imposed, however, that's expected to increase accordingly. Restricting pile driving to 8 hours also precludes a contractor from working a 4 10-hour day. The benefits and efficiencies of 410s are well documented. Also, working 410s would greatly reduce the amount of noise the surrounding citizens are exposed to by giving them a 3-day respite from any driving noise. Saturday work is typically used as a makeup day for lost time due to inclement weather, breakdowns, and unanticipated project schedule delays. We are aware that we could get a variance for Saturday work, but overwhelmingly the immediate need for Saturday work is unanticipated, and we wouldn't have time to go get noise variance. And the time it took to get that would just extend the time for the project. Therefore, the effects of reducing the hours of pile driving and eliminating Saturday work will have the opposite effect by increasing the days citizens need to be exposed to the pile driving operations. These proposed restrictions do not just affect the pile driving contractor. It impacts all of the other crafts that follow the deep foundation installation. The excavators must grade the area where the pile is driven, the carpenters, the surveyors, all the other crafts. They can't do any of their work until we drive the pile. So it has a major cost impact on the project. So all of these ripple effects equate to a large economic cost that's been added to the price of the structure, which ultimately is passed on to the end user. Now, that could have an adverse impact to low-income or subsidized housing. Just one.
Sure, one more. Go ahead.
Okay. No one wants to complete the project ahead of schedule more than a pile driving contractor. It's always our intention to get in and get out as quickly as possible. Time is money. Imposing these seemingly minor restrictions will in fact result in extended duration of the project, therefore exposing the citizens to more excessive noise.
Not sure if I understood one of your points, which was about the 410s. If the hours that are allowed for pile driving are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., what
under the current, under the current rules, we can drive from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Right. This would be 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So
Right.
that's 10 hours.
Well, that's true, but we need a little bit of time to get ready.
Right, but the getting ready doesn't make noise, right? So, I mean, I'm just trying to understand.
Typically not, no.
Yeah, so it's not construction operations are prohibited, it's the actual driving of the
That's
piles,
correct.
right?
Right.
So.
But that's what we do, we drive pile.
Right, I understand, but it seems to me that, given any kind of reasonable interpretation, that this ought to allow 410s, but.
Well, it would be very tight. It would be difficult, let's put it that way. Whereas now there's a cushion there where we could do the 410s without any problem, because we typically do that.
Do your staff currently work just 10 hours, or do they work the 12-hour day?
Oh, no, typically it's 10 hours in the summertime, but in the wintertime, of course, it's a little less.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Who'd like to be next? Go ahead.
Mayor Hales, Commissioners, thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. My name is Rory Martindale. I'm the safety manager for DeWitt Construction. I think it is ironic we are speaking just after the council heard affordable housing issues that affect this city. I believe that these recommendations that the Noise Board has recommended to you will add additional cost to those projects and with constraints to the development of future high-density housing. I respectfully disagree with the Noise Board's review recommendations that the city limit the hours and days of pile driving within the city limits. This disagreement is not because I want to discredit any of the great citizens and the right to be heard. This disagreement is, all right, my point is that these recommendations from the Noise Review Board will limit the developers, property owners, and contractors to efficiently work for a sensible, affordable, safe, and effective product of the city's infrastructure. DeWitt Construction has been an active in pile driving in the city of Portland for the past 36 years. We are a premier pile driving company that has set many of the foundations of the buildings that make up this city. This includes pile driving. We always try to be good stewards and with the use of the proven foundational techniques that include that method. We understand that the part of the growing community is building high-density multi-use neighborhoods. We drove pile at the other locations during the same time frame as the Pearls Block 17 project. Those neighboring communities are to the south at the south waterfront and just to the north at Swan Island. The Swan Island project sat directly adjacent to the Willamette River and the northwest waterfront apartments and condominiums. This project was about a mile from the Pearls Block 17 area and installed about 350 130-foot tall pile. Of those projects, we had one project with no known complaints, the south waterfront, and during the same time period, this is only having the same makeup as the multi-use high-density area as the Pearl. The Swan Island project produced 2 non-formal complaints that were not registered with the noise office. The point to transform the Title 18 noise code with these recommendations based upon a singular event of pile driving at Block 17 does not seek to add merit to the code. The board's recommendation pressures and restricts the developers, property owners, and contractors to complete projects by increasing the cost and timelines to extend the time that adds to more cycles in which equipment has to operate. So we're adding added cost to those projects that will be passed down. It does not make sense to add more days that will subject the citizens and our employees to the extended exposures. The points are, there are no other studies within the city to give merit to the weighty consequences that these recommendations carry to our work. This simply is tying the hands of the project developers, owners, and the contractors. It actually extends the time period in which the activity will produce more unwanted activity and extended periods. This does not give the citizens the relief they seek. The chime changes push the projects to go into late afternoon hours and extra days or weeks. The recommendations affect employees' families with stretched out work hours, more time spent in traffic, not being able to participate with their families. It produces more late afternoon activity as the people arrive home in those neighborhoods after their workday ends. We want to avoid unnecessary timeframes. It's in our best interest, not only for this community, but for the safety of our employees. We want to be efficient and complete our work timely. This produces less risk to our personnel, less cycles of equipment, and helps reduce the exposures that the recommendations would expand.
I want to get you to wrap up because you've used up your time. Go ahead, finish.
I urge you to keep the current code status and let us compete the projects in a safe, timely manner. Please think about the consequences of these recommendations on current code works, and we will work to minimize our exposures. After all, we have great value in our employees. They are citizens too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you mind if I just ask a question,
please,
Mayor?
go ahead.
And then I apologize, I'm going to have to leave shortly. You said that that these regulations would increase the cost. Have you run the numbers, and what's the increased cost that you're referring to, and as a percentage of the project?
We had testimony earlier during the review about the great cost that would be involved from the geotax to the developers. Our cost ourselves would be significant. The 1 hour a day, well, just for example, it's about $1,100 per hour for the drill rig. So that 1 extra hour that we're not installing pile is significant. You extend that over a 4 or 5 week period. And like I said earlier, that equates to about 1 on the low end, 1.4 on the high end, 2.5 piles that we could install a day just from that 1 hour.
So you have a rough sense of what the cost would be. And I guess the second question I just want to ask, because you alluded to affordable housing, and forgive me if this is an uninformed question.
Sure.
Do you do any pile driving generally with projects that have a 4/1, that is a concrete base and a four floors of wood structure? Does that building require pile driving in any part of the city?
Yes.
Can you give me just an example, just so I can?
I believe in the Pearl, some of the previous projects in the Pearl, and
that's because of the soil conditions?
yes,
Even for a 5-story building that has a
Yes.
4/1?
yes, it could be a 1-story building.
I see. Okay.
Okay, good to know. Please.
I'm Garcia Laco with DeWitt Construction. I was just here for technical questions, if you guys
Okay,
had
you
any.
answered one. Thank you. Any others? Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
The next three are Lightning Watchdog X, Mary Sipe, and Patrice Hansen.
Come on up if you're here. I don't see lighting, but
Then we'll go with Stan Penkin.
come on up, Stan.
Stan's in a state of shock that he's actually been called to testify.
He's been called to speak, so at long last. Welcome.
Hi.
Go ahead, please.
Stan, another hour, you would have gotten free parking, so just.
I walk all the
You
time.
walk, so.
I always walk.
Good afternoon. Go ahead. Who'd ever like to be first?
Okay,
Just give us your name and proceed,
my name's
please.
Mary Sipe. Hello again. We're back. I have a very carefully prepared presentation, and I just threw it out. I'm going to just speak to some issues that I feel have just bubbled up right now, and so pardon me if I'm a little scattered. I want to clarify one thing. Pile driving is several different methods, and when we're talking about the restrictions that we requested regarding pile driving, we are specifically referring to what's called impact hammer pile driving, and I think we made this pretty clear when we were here before. And one of the things that's striking me right now is that there's all this conversation about how the way to give the citizens the relief that we've requested is, to not extend the duration of time by making these changes. Well, honestly, the way to give the citizens the relief that they've requested is to focus more on the CFA, the Continuous Flight Auger Cast. When that equipment is used, noise is not an issue. It blends in with the rest of the construction noise. Another point that I wanted to make is that we keep hearing about how it's more expensive, it takes longer, issues around the contaminated soil that the auger cast brings up. And do we want to focus on the cost and the time and all of these things and completely ignore the impact, the negative impact that the impact hammer has on livability and really health issues of the citizens that are living in the neighborhood? Also, it was just mentioned that this is all being brought about because of Block 17 impact driving that was done. Actually, when we came to you before, we came because there were 5 to 6 more projects slated to begin before the end of last year, and they were all going to have impact hammer pile driving. We took it upon ourselves to go directly to the developers of those projects, and they agreed to use a different method. And that's the reason that so far Block 17 is the only one that's used the impact hammer. Am I out of time?
Close.
Close, okay. The other thing that I want to just hit real quickly is on the restriction on the hours of the day and the days of the week. The one thing that I would urge you to consider is variances. If we allow variances to that restriction, it makes it worthless. And already, Tiffany Schweitzer from White Street Properties has contacted the Noise Control Office and asked if variances are going to be allowed. So that tells you a little bit about the value. Thank you.
Thank you.
And could you please also send us your written testimony that you had
I
prepared?
will. In fact, I brought copies of it.
Thank you very much.
Just leave those with Carl, and she'll make sure we get those. Thank you. Welcome.
Patrice Hansen. I'm a retired psychiatric technician, and I'm a resident of the Pearl. And I was here a little bit over a year ago with Mary and some of my other neighbors to present our concerns and research in regard to the impact hammer pile driving. As you know, our research showed serious detrimental effects on health. It also showed the economic impact on those who work in a home office or a local business. We also discovered that there are indeed quieter methods. So as Mary said, we were facing the possibility of many months of traumatic pounding until the developers decide to switch to the auger drill. And that was greeted with much gratitude and appreciation. And on May 9th of this year, I was awarded a Northwest Examiner Community Award for efforts which resulted, at least in part, in this change that positively benefited livability in the Pearl. This award represents the voices of many people, not just a few, many people, and the kind of consideration they want and deserve as development continues and our city grows. I heard today, and I heard at the Noise Review Board hearings, that the impact hammer was basically a nuisance that only lasts 3 to 4 weeks. Well, on Block 17, it lasted 7 weeks, and it was much more than a nuisance, but a traumatic assault. The construction that's been going all around us for the past year might be considered a nuisance, but you know, it's something that somebody can live with. I mean, I can live with it. And, but the impact hammer is another story altogether. Some have said that it's a cheaper method, but then the expense truly ends up being carried by the neighbors who do not stand to benefit from the end result. And it's hard to see this as just. But I very much appreciate the work that so many people have been putting into this issue to try to find a resolution. And I see limiting the hours and requiring adequate notification as very good. But knowing that alternatives exist and that there are places in the world where the impact hammer is not allowed, like Japan, I see this as inadequate. It's a partial solution. It is reasonable to expect strong limitations around the use of the impact hammer, allowing it only perhaps in a rare case where it is proven that there are geological considerations that require it. And I'm concerned that Pacific Foundations, the company that provided the auger drill, were not invited to the Noise Review Board hearings to testify before these proposals were made. There was plenty of representation for those who primarily offer the impact hammer. It also would have been good to see representatives in the field of health speak on those issues. Federal noise guidelines suggest the following: avoid impact pile driving where possible in noise-sensitive areas. Drilled piles or the use of sonic or vibratory pile drivers are quieter alternatives where the geological conditions permit their use. So I trust that out of this hearing today that you will make wise decisions that really serve the highest and the best good for everybody involved. And thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Stan Penkin. I'm a resident of the Pearl District and a board member and an officer of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association. I am testifying today on behalf of myself, as well as a board member of Friendly Streets, a nonprofit organization that advocates for quality of life and livability issues across the entire city. As a now retired builder and developer, I understand the challenges of constructing buildings efficiently and cost-effectively. I also understand and strongly believe that livability is a crucial element to the health and viability of a city and its neighborhoods. Those who live in dense urban areas are unrealistic to think that city life will be an idyllic one, without noise, without graffiti, without trash, or without other nuisances that are just part of city life. But many of those nuisances can and should be mitigated if there is a sincere and cooperative will and effort to do so. While I have not had the misfortune of living directly next door to incessant days of relentless impact hammer pile driving, I am familiar with its discomfort and have empathy for those who are subjected to it day after day. While the current proposal to limit the hours of impact hammer pile driving is a recognition that there is indeed a problem and is a good start, I also feel that more can be done. Some of the recent construction activity, most particularly in the Pearl District, was mitigated by the use of the auger drilling method, as was so aptly explained. While there are geotechnical reasons why the auger method may not always be feasible, I would like to see further review and investigation into developing a code that would place restrictions on the use of impact hammer pile driving methods where it is feasible to do so. I support the reduction of the hours. I support the proposal for POs to go to the code hearing officer and the adjustments to the EX zoning, but hope to see future discussion about expanding mitigation efforts. While the current concern has been largely relegated to the Pearl District, Portland is growing rapidly and is expected to continue to do so for years to come. Neighborhoods will be subjected, many neighborhoods will be subjected to the problem, and now is the time to think ahead and get in front of it. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you all.
Thank you. The next three are Tom Foster, Mary Helen Kincaid, and Ryan Hike.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, yes. I'm Tom Foster, and I do live in the Pearl District, and I'm a realtor there, and so I understand the costs that go into construction. And anytime you increase costs, it impacts the end product. However, I think the issue here is really clear. The issue here is the intent of the law. The intent of the law is to mitigate noise. But we have exceptions for the law. The exceptions are situations where, like impact pile driving, like jackhammers, somebody mentioned metal grinding, that we have exceptions for that. So the exceptions are valid. However, with the impact pile driver, we now have an auger type. So the exception that has been granted for the impact pile driver is no longer a valid exception. I think the council should consider banning the use of pile drivers unless the engineer for the project indicates that it's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mary Helen.
Ooh, do I get his minute and 30 seconds that I had onto mine?
No, you just get your own time. You know that.
I'm like Mary. I had testimony, spent countless hours rewriting, and I kind of threw it out and made notes based on it. And at the end, I'm going to skip to the chase because that's what you did in the last hearing. I need to say who I am. Mary Helen Kincaid. I don't live in the Pearl District, but I have a great interest in noise because of past encounters. This is not just about the Pearl District. There's going to be noise on Fremont and Mississippi and Albina and Killingsworth, and all those people are going to be back here complaining about this. I want to tell you a couple of things that what I would want to know if I were you, that I don't know whether you know. DeWitt Construction, according to the Deep Foundation Institute, of which they are a member, owns 3 patents for pile drivers. So of course they're not going to want to do away with pile drivers. I think there's somewhat of a bias against the citizens that bring complaints, and I think that's overall, people that complain kind of become irritating to us, but in this case, I think they brought respectable arguments, they brought research, and they brought solutions, and so I want that to be recognized. Patrice mentioned that she was the Northwest Examiner community leader. She was focused on a newsletter for her apartment for her efforts, and I think that needs to be recognized. A pile driver contractor at a noise review board, here's another thing, a pile driver contractor at a noise review board hearing said, pile driving only happens for 3 hours and 52 minutes in an 8-hour day. Well, it doesn't just happen 3 hours and 42 minutes and then it stops. It happens all day long, and you don't know when it's going to happen, and it's that huge booming, and there's no predictability there, so it's very disturbing. I have a question, and I don't remember who asked it, but about the cost. If a contractor has people working on Saturdays, I'm guessing that they're getting paid, or from what my little research, they're getting paid time and a half. So if they aren't working on Saturdays, they're reducing the cost there. My question was the same as yours about the 4 10-hour days. The gentleman said they could work 4 10-hour days. I say take it, because then that gives you Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Right now they have 5 10-hour days with the current proposal. I think each of you should try and find a noise variant. I think the noise variance system is broken. You can't find them, you can't track them. It's left up to the variance holder to inform citizens, and they don't know how to contact them because they don't get the information. So that whole process needs to be looked at and examined. I think there's precedents in place with BDS notices. Each of you should go and try. I found one in each one of your neighborhoods, except I didn't know Dan's address, so didn't know. But each of you should try and make up a city address. Find a variance in your neighborhood and try to track what happened with that. I don't think you'll be able to, and that will incentivize you to fix the noise variance system. Public notifications is difficult. You heard that nobody appealed. Well, nobody knew how to appeal. They didn't even know that they could appeal. And when I sat in the lobby of the Ramona one afternoon, I asked people, do you know? And they said, no, we don't know. Some were afraid of raising rents. I don't think we should operate on the only method available outcome. You should operate on the desired future outcome. That's my new catchphrase from Bureau of Planning. We want a desired future outcome. We should operate towards that, not just what we can give up with. And then to cut to the chase really quickly, I think the whole EX zone thing should be handled with mixed-use zone development. They're already looking at it. They're already doing it. It's going to be too complicated to change zones in certain parts of the city. Go back and rechange if it has to be changed. The 5 decibels, if the time is limited, I think would take care of that, but that's just my opinion. And there's lots of more places than just the Central East Side. I spoke with Bureau of Planning and Barry Manning about that, and there's whole other areas of the city with it would have that problem. And lastly, if you're going to ban impact pile hammer pile drivers, if you're going to ban those, ban the other things that are in that same classification of noise. There's scrapers, cement cutters, all of those things that are exempt now because you can't measure the noise because they would never come into compliance. Those things should be banned as well because they make noise and disturb people. I think the Pearl District neighbors are getting off or letting it get by easy by not banning all of those things that are currently exempt during those times, and pile drivers is mentioned with all of those, so I think all those noisy things. And then lastly, I just wanted, because I always have a quote, Maya Angelou on a postage stamp is quoted as saying, but it wasn't her, it was another woman named Joan Walsh England that said it, the bird does not sing because it has an answer, but because it has a song. And my song today is help these people live a sustainable life that they can enjoy their time, if only for 2 days a week when it's quiet, so that they can have the picnics, they can have the time on their patios, and that they're able to enjoy their lives. And thank you for letting me go over 2 minutes and 12 seconds.
Thank you.
I have a question. What do you think about the proposal to have the appeals heard by the code hearings officer?
I didn't even get to that, and I will give you my written testimony. You got it. I think the hearings officer is a great place for an appeal, but I think the person that does the appealing should be the person that wants the appeal, wants the variance to the existing code. That's how all the other infrastructure bureaus do it. For instance, the Public Works Appeals Panel, when a developer doesn't want to put in what's required as a 50-foot sidewalk because it triggered all these code things, they have to go before a appeals panel and make their case. So I think that because there's not a really good notification process in place, if people don't know that there's something that they can appeal, they aren't. And I think that's why they haven't seen appeals. It was only because of the vigilance of David Benadia that this whole appeal thing came up, because he took the time to figure it out. But I think if you want to change and you don't want to go by the code, then you should be the responsible party to ask for that change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Hike. I work for the Pacific Northwest Regional Council of Carpenters. We represent over 20,000 carpenters and pile drivers in the Pacific Northwest, many of which live and work in this area. They would be negatively impacted if these revisions were made. We strongly encourage no revisions to the current noise regulations to pile driving that would heighten the current regulations. I want to note that DeWitt Construction, they're a partner of ours, as is Pacific Foundation, who was alluded to earlier. Both those contractors do install auger cast pile. So I don't think it would be any problem of DeWitt's to install that type of pile. I think why they're speaking against it, or one of the reasons, is that that type of pile would not work in many of the soil conditions. It just wouldn't work. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say one thing about the soil conditions, because I did hear.
Very quickly.
Yeah, no, DEQ went out and examined the contaminated soils, and that question was asked because neighbors were concerned about this as well as that. And I can get you testimony of what happened, but they basically said, in some places, yes, but not all places, and it was just a minimal area because there's a whole Hoyt Street mitigation plan. So there is already facts on what it would do.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, who's
The
next?
last two who signed up are Carrie Stanley and Susan Pierce.
Come on up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Commissioners, my name is Kerry Stanley. I'm at 4900 Southwest Griffith Drive, Suite 205 in Beaverton, and I'm a registered acoustical engineer. I'm the representative on the Noise Review Board that fills that position that's open to the representative of that discipline. And I've been on the board, I was on the board 25 years and then was off for a few years. I've been asked to come back on, so maybe another 25, I don't know. But, I just wanted to provide my support to what's being proposed. I was one of the people who, on the board, when we decided to submit this to you, who would like to have seen a little more done, maybe some investigation into some mitigation requirements. But I agree that at this point in time, we're probably not there to be able to develop that. But I want to encourage you to not just make these changes and leave it for another 40 years before you look at it again. I would encourage you to adopt the changes that are being proposed as a good first step. And as you've heard from the DeWitt, they would like to see that not affect them forever. Maybe you consider doing some code changes later in which you say, if you can meet these limits, these level limits, you're allowed to use the hammer if the distance is far enough. Something, and I tried to propose that as a possibility, but we didn't have time to develop that. So I'm just saying, I think for a first cut, this is a good step. It does give relief to people in the Pearl District and to other areas in which the hammer pile driver will be used. And I don't think you can, as has been testified to, I don't think you can limit the type of pile driving that will be used. That is something that the engineer needs to be called upon to decide. And with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. If not, I'm.
Thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you.
Sustained willingness, I should say.
Hi, it's been so long. I'm Susan Pierce. I'm speaking at the moment as a former member of the Noise Review Board for a number of years, preceded by a year or so on the Noise Review Task Force, in both cases appointed by Commissioner Charlie Hales. And at the very end, I think I'm hoping to have some time to change hats. My comments are random. I am ever so sympathetic with construction noise, having spent a summer with all my doors closed because of construction on both sides of my house. And I did not hear this said much here, but I know that the problem is compounded when there's more than one project going on at the same time. I have also reams of material on my files, my computer files, about the health effects of noise and sleep deprivation, partly related to train noise in my neighborhood. We've heard from people from both sides. Nobody seems to be really happy. I would really support Carrie Stanley's suggestion that we accept what the Noise Review Board is offering at this time. I know them to be diligent in their research, but also that we need to continue looking at this issue as there are new developments and new technologies, similar to what we recommended some years ago with the issue with leaf blowers, that's readjusted at regular intervals. I want to make note that the mayor has helped to get the noise office back up to a total of full-time equivalent hours of 3 for the first time in decades, and to thank him for that, because I know the difficulties of working as a one-man. And that 2016 is the 40th anniversary of the Portland Noise Office. It was a leader in the United States. So we need to continue to support them as we go forward. Now, as I change hats, as I look around, I think I may be the closest thing to a representative from the Central East Side. And so if I can comment on that exemption, the map that we saw today is a little different than the map that we saw yesterday, that shows even more block faces of EX zones right across the street from IG zones. And I know the question came up a little bit yesterday. I think that it's very appropriate to exempt them from the rules. Also would point out that in answer to a question that came from over here, can I finish my sentence? That in the southern, especially in the Southern Triangle, and if not other places in the Central East Side Industrial District, but especially in that Southern Triangle, it's made up of layers and layers, up to 120 feet or more of sawdust, and the need to, I don't know enough about pile drivers to tell you what kind it takes, but I do know that they need to drive way down to, that was necessary for the new MLK viaduct. That was why it had to be built. And as a member of the Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, I know the need that we had to support that building with all those locomotives.
Yeah,
So,
you're right. Good.
my comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Okay, I think we want to get some staff questions addressed here, so come on
Well,
back.
we do
Oh, I'm
actually,
sorry.
Mayor.
Come on up. Come on up. Didn't know we had anyone else to speak. Sorry.
No,
It's okay. Just give us your name and let us know.
thank you. My name is Sybil Joan Glebo. I live in Northwest Portland. I live in affordable housing, so that came up. I live in a building where there are a lot of older people, and people in affordable housing are very often vulnerable and don't really have any place to go. I earn my living by providing support services for people with disabilities, and I can't really offer much technical expertise beyond what people have already talked about. I did present a letter, or I submitted a letter to the Noise Board, and I'd just like to quote from it briefly about public health. It's well recognized that the stress of prolonged exposure to loud noise is harmful to health. The more intensity it is with no let-up, the worse it is. I think the pile driving noise is probably hard on the construction workers too, but I can't really speak to that. This is especially serious for people already dealing with health concerns, such as neurological conditions. We're talking about multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and autism, high blood pressure and heart conditions, hearing disorders. I have a hearing sensitivity, migraines, cancer, people on chemotherapy, anyone preparing for or recovering from surgery, anybody with PTSD and similar conditions. Surely everyone knows someone who's experiencing some of this. Anybody who needs to heal, rest, study, or work at home would be adversely affected. How about people who work a split shift or work the night shift and they have to sleep during the day? I have an ear sensitivity condition. I carry around some construction worker headphones to wear. I mean, I don't know what pile driving would do to me if I had to live next door to it. I would probably have to go somewhere. A lot of people really can't afford to escape from it. And Portland is known for livability. And I understand that we have a risk for earthquakes and that this is a very serious matter. I should say this probably. I was in Santa Cruz at the time of the 7.1. The town collapsed. It was river, you know, what they call liquefaction land. Okay, there's a 7, there's an 8, there's a 9. Is pile driving really going to, you know, solve this problem? And what about, in the meantime, the effect on the health of the people who are dealing with it? I understand there are costs involved. What about the cost of the health of the person who's undergoing chemotherapy and is trying to survive? So, you know, I know this is controversial and there's a lot to be said on both sides. So I'm here to speak for the people who perhaps are not here to speak for themselves, such as some of the people that I work with and some of the people who are my neighbors. And I guess that's really all I have to say, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to come and say this, and that people are giving an ear to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
So Mayor, given the late hour,
You might want to continue.
yes, I would.
So I think that's a great idea. I think we should continue this a week to give the council a chance to get some questions answered. We also might want to take up an amendment, because if we're going to make that change that I described, or any other changes.
Actually, one of the reasons I'm delighted at the assignment of the Office of Neighborhood Involvement is the opportunity to delve more deeply into this issue, because one of the changes is proposing to take away appeals to City Council, which then more limits our ability to hear some of these concerns. That was why we raised it. So I think there's actually several issues within the testimony that we heard today, and potentially improvements that we might want to make. So if we could send it back to pull it back to the off, or continue it,
Just
but then.
continue it. We've had the hearing, we've heard from people, we've got questions to address. So if we could just continue this until next week, was that?
I actually would prefer a little more time, since
Okay, but you and I are both going to be gone, so.
Right.
So.
Well, I'm not going to be gone until the end of July, so I could do some work with folks who have been here today to get some more information and look at other amendments that I might want to propose.
So why don't we continue this for 2 weeks? I won't be here, but, so that might be a problem.
You're such a taskmaster. I may have other things that I have planned for the next 2 weeks. But
Maybe I won't go out of town now.
that's right, as the president of the council, who knows what might happen.
You want me to, I don't want to continue it to the 29th.
Do we have to continue it to a time certain?
No, we can just continue it indefinitely and let you work on it and then reschedule it, I believe.
I would really appreciate that,
Wanna do
thank
that?
you. But of course, I will do that in collaboration
Right.
with you.
So,
Well, my only point would be, you know, there are people that are
yeah, people want us to act
being
on this.
impacted by
Yeah.
this.
So, so I don't want to continue this indefinitely with a sense that we're not going to come back to it. So
Oh,
I
we
tell you
are.
what, why don't we set it for July 29th?
Right.
And then that we always have the prerogative of holding it over if it's not ready. But that way, we know.
Yeah, the
it's on
29th is reasonable. I can
We
do
know
it
what's
by
on
then.
the schedule for July 29th.
Yeah.
So that acceptable, everybody? Okay, so we'll continue this item to July 29th.
Thank
and
you.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Good.